Cryptids from every state in the United States of America. Alabama. One of the most famous cryptids in Alabama is known as the White Thang, or the White Thang of Alabama. Supposedly, the White Thang is the most famous cryptid from Alabama. The creature has been spotted throughout the 1990s, and the local news, WAFF48, has published articles discussing it. One of the articles discussed how the White Thang and the Sasquatch are different, but how they may be potentially distantly related. Oh, yeah, and if you can tell by the pictures on screen, White Thang is essentially just a big Bigfoot, but he's white, hence the name. Alaska. One of the most interesting cryptids from Alaska is known as Tizaruk, and it is believed to be a sea serpent reported from the subarctic coastal waters of King and Nunavut Islands in the Bering Sea, off the Pacific coast of Alaska. People that have claimed to see Tizaruk typically claim to either only see their head and neck or occasionally the tail. Therefore, the general form of this animal is unknown, but it can allegedly rise out of the water almost 7 to 8 feet. Its head is snake-like and its tail is flippered, but the Tezerek has also been described as a giant caterpillar or worm-like creature. This is essentially the Loch Ness Monster of Alaska. There isn't really much known about this creature, but I thought it would be more interesting than another Bigfoot variant, just so this list isn't full of them. Arizona, the Mogollon Monster. The Mogollon Monster is commonly described as a large bipedal creature, which means it walks on 2 feet. Originally, I thought that meant it had 2 penises, but it turns out he's not that cool. It's also described as being over 7 feet tall with large red eyes. Its body is said to be covered with long black or reddish brown hair, with the exclusion of hair on its chest, face, feet, or hands. Reports claim it also has a strong pungent odor like dead fish, skunk, bad body odor, or even decaying peat moss or the musk of a snapping turtle. Some people claim that the creature is allegedly nocturnal, omnivorous, and territorial, and sometimes violent. In numerous reports, the monster has been said to emit a blood-curdling scream, described as sounding like a woman in great distress. The Mogollon Monster is also known as the Arizona Bigfoot, and is really just an interesting variant of Bigfoot with very similar qualities. Arkansas, the White River Monster. An urban legend in Arkansas is known as the White River Monster, and it's a large creature reportedly first spotted off the banks of the White River near Newport, Arkansas. The White River Monster is reported as having gray skin and as wide as a car and as long as 3 cars. And as news reports spread about this monster, the city began construction on a huge rope and net, but the program actually ended due to a lack of materials and funding. The creature was first spotted in 1915 and is even believed to have an impact on the Civil War. During the Civil War, the White River was used often for transportation, and the monster is supposedly blamed for overturning a boat. The monster was notably spotted again in 1937 and 1971, and there's over 100 confirmed sightings from 1915 to present day. Basically, one of your run-of-the-mill interesting river cryptids. California, the Dark Watchers. I actually have mentioned the Dark Watchers before on my channel, but I like them, so I'm going to mention them again. Oh, and the video I talked about them in is Scariest Mythical Creatures from Around the World, Part 3. The Dark Watchers are tall, sometimes giant-sized, featureless dark silhouettes often seen wearing brimmed hats or even carrying walking sticks. They're only seen during sunrise or sunset, and they are motionless, watching travelers from the horizon, typically seen along the Santa Lucia mountain range. The legend states that no one has been able to see them up close, and if you approach them, they vanish. These are harmless cryptids, and some believe they are simply a reminder that you are not alone in these woods, and to respect nature and your surroundings, or to be aware at all times. They serve as more or less of a gentle warning, and although creepy, I think they're pretty cool. Colorado, Slide Rock Bolter. Slide Rock Bolter is a really strange cryptid from lumberjack folklore, primarily during the 19th and 20th centuries. It is a creature that is believed to live in the mountains of Colorado, but only on mountains with a slope at an angle greater than 45 degrees. It has a huge head, small eyes, a big mouth, and a tail similar to a dolphin with big grab hooks. The best way to describe this cryptid is honestly just a big land whale that slides down mountains to eat people. This creature is said to have caused great unease amongst tourists visiting the mountains of Colorado, and it will often remain motionless for days at a time until groups of tourists walk by its path. At that point, it will release its hooks from the top of the mountain and slide down the mountain to gulp up the entire group of tourists, or at least so the legend goes. This is definitely an interesting cryptid, but it's kind of funny. And if you plan on going to the mountains of Colorado soon, make sure you get your protractor out to make sure the angle is less than 45 degrees. Or at least look out for any whale-looking things up the mountain. Connecticut, the Melonheads. The Melonheads are actually a folklore that exists in Ohio, Michigan, and Connecticut, but for this segment, we're only going to be focusing on the ones in Connecticut. The Melonheads are described as small humanoid beings with bulbous heads who occasionally emerge from hiding places and attack people. That's the basic gist. But in Connecticut specifically, according to one telling of the myth, Fairfield County was the location of an asylum for the criminally insane that burned down in the fall of 1960. 1960, resulting in the death of all of the staff and most of the patients, except for 10 to 20 inmates unaccounted for, which supposedly had survived and escaped into the woods. The legend states that the melonheads' appearance is a result of them resorting to cannibalism in order to survive the harsh winters in the region and inbreeding, which caused their heads to swell up and deform. Less of a cryptid, more of like a fairy tale, mythical creature thing. If I haven't made it obvious yet, I'm kind of using the terms interchangeably. But yeah, that's the melonheads. Definitely strange. Delaware, the pukwudgie. If there's any Exploring with Josh fans watching this video, you might be familiar with the pukwudgie. Pukwudgies are mythical creatures with shape-shifting abilities, also known for luring people to their deaths using magic and attacking people with poison arrows. They may seem initially friendly, but they turn hostile towards humans. Legend warns against annoying them while they are being friendly, as they retaliate with mischief and harm. Pukwudgie itself roughly translates to little man of the woods that vanishes. And as far as appearance goes, looks like a human-like creature, albeit much shorter, much hairier, and sometimes seen either naked or with very primal-esque clothing. So if you're ever in Delaware or even live in Delaware, make sure you watch out for little elf-looking mischievous little guys in the woods. Florida, the muck monster. In late August of 2009, two members of a non-profit called Lagoon Keepers were attempting to remove what they thought were a log from the Lake Worth Lagoon in Palm Beach, Florida. That log proceeded to give the two non-profit members a runaround of the entire lake, diving deep whenever the boat came within 10 feet of it. During the chase, one of the men called this monster the elusive muck monster, and the other man filmed the encounter and put it online. The news picked up the story, and the city quickly took note and did almost everything they could to profit off of the situation. T-shirts were sold, specialty drinks were made in bars, and the city even installed viewfinders along the water. The only real visual that we have on this creature is its wood-like appearance from part of its back poking through the water briefly, which to me seems similar to a snapping turtle, but who knows. So anyways, this creature did end up being pretty good publicity and a decent boost in tourism, which is kind of funny. But as far as the cryptid goes, there's not much information. Georgia, Altamahaha, or Alti. Basically just the Loch Ness monster of Georgia. It's believed to live in small streams and abandoned rice fields, and sightings are few and far between. There's not a ton of information about this besides the fact that it's extremely similar to the Loch Ness monster, supposedly. But yeah, this one's kind of uninspired. Moving on. Hawaii. Menehune. Okay, this one's actually cool. Menehune are essentially small dwarves that live in the valleys and rural areas of Hawaii, hidden far, far away from human settlements. The Menehune are also described as superb craftspeople, building temples, fish ponds, roads, canoes, and houses. Some of these structures that Hawaiian folklore attributed to the Menehune existing. They were said to be in Hawaii before settlers from Polynesia migrated many centuries ago. Their favorite food is banana, but they also like fish. Legend has it is that the Menehune only appear during night, and that is when they spend their hours crafting masterpieces. Not much more is known about the Menehune, but I think they're pretty cool dudes. They're just doing their thing, living in a cool place, building cool stuff. You can't hate that. Good job, Hawaii. That's a cool cryptid, or folklore, or mythical creature, or whatever. Idaho. Charlie. Charlie, much like Alti, is basically just a Loch Ness monster dupe not worth mentioning. Sorry, Idaho. Do better. I honestly thought they would have some sort of potato monster, and maybe they do, but I didn't see it. Illinois. The Enfield Horror. This creature is described as having 3 legs, a short body, 2 short arms, and 2 pink eyes as big as flashlights. It stands at 4.5 feet tall and is grayish in color. It's definitely a gross and droopy looking creature, and it's honestly pretty creepy as well. Its first sighting was in the early 1970s in the small town of Enfield, Illinois, hence the name. During one of the first sightings, a very convincing story got out and got media attention, and this caused a lot of hunters to become excited about the prospect of finding and killing the Enfield Horror. For a while, tourists traveled and hunters began hunting, both looking for this gray creature in the woods. All of these hunts were unsuccessful, and as the hunting and tourism enthusiasm died down, 4 more sightings were reported since. Indiana. Mesha Kennebec, also known as the Manitou Monster, is an Indiana cryptid that is said to live in Lake Manitou for over centuries, being spotted by Native Americans and early settlers. By those who have seen it, it has been described as 60 feet long with the head of a bull with a serpent body. It is more or less of your run-of-the-mill lake monster, but it wasn't an exact ripoff of the Loch Ness Monster, so I thought I'd give it a bit more attention. Pretty cool, and the Native American ties are always interesting because their folklore is great, but that's about all I got. Iowa. Van Meter Monster. The Van Meter Monster is reported to be a 9-foot tall winged bat-like creature, also known as the Van Meter Visitor. This creature was said to shoot light from its horns and is immune to bullets. Witnesses made plaster casts of its 3-toed footprints after a confrontation. The creature has been seen disappearing into a nearby coal mine, and similar sightings have continued up until the 2010s. Today, there is even a commemorative event, and it's held around the anniversary of the sightings. Pretty cool. I like that it gets the community together. It seems scary. Kind of reminds me of Mothman. 8 out of 10. Let's keep going. This video is kind of evolving, so now it's more, now I'm just ranking these guys. Okay. If I lose any more brain cells, this might just end up being a tier list. Kansas. Deer Woman. Deer Woman, or sometimes known as Deer Lady, is a spirit from Native American mythology. She can be seen in two forms, either a beautiful young woman with deer feet or just a deer. And her general vibe can kind of shift depending on the context of who she's dealing with, but for the most part, she has her sights set on men who have harmed women and children, and to them, she is vengeful and murderous, typically known for luring these men to their death. Overall, Deer Woman's got a pretty cool vibe. Good job, Kansas. Kentucky. The Pope Lick Monster. Yeah, you heard that right. We're already off to a weird start. The Pope Lick Monster. Unfortunately, this monster is not known for licking the Pope, but it doesn't get much better. Pope Lick Monster, or more commonly known as Goat Man, is a legendary part man, part goat, and even part sheep creature, reported to live beneath the railroad that goes over Pope Lick Creek in Fisherville, Louisville, Kentucky. Legends about the Goat Man claim that it uses hypnosis and voice mimicry to lead trespassers on its bridge either onto the tracks in the way of a oncoming train or to below the bridge where it can attack them with a blood-stained axe. Typically, Goatman would make its voice sound like the voice of either someone else or even potentially someone familiar to you, making you want to see who's talking to you and where they are. Some legends state that Goatman is so vengeful because he was treated so poorly during his lifetime for being such a different creature, at least different by human standards. And some legends state that Goatman is simply a reincarnation of a farmer who made a deal with the devil. Either way, he's definitely strange looking, and if you're passing by a bridge in Pope Lick, Kentucky, don't lick the Pope, don't go under the bridge, don't go over the bridge, and if you hear somebody you think you know, you don't. Get out of there. Louisiana. Fille Fouillée. To describe what you're looking at, let me give you a bit of context. The story of Fille Fouillée starts in Acadia. Legend states that there was a blacksmith named Will Smith. No, not Will Smith. Will Smith. And when Will Smith died and went up to heaven, he was given a second chance at life. But that second life he lived was not a good one. Unfortunately, he chose to do evil this time around. Because of this, the second time he died, the devil doomed him to live on earth forever with only a single coal to warm him. That is why this cryptid or spirit is only really seen as a dimly lit orb in the distance. There is typically no figure associated with this creature. Fille Fouillée spends his time in the swamps of southern Louisiana trying to lure people out deep into the swamp to their death. It is advised that anybody near the swamp at night avoid following any strange dim lights in the distance, as the ending is never truly good. Maine. Kawakwa. Kawakwa is a cryptid from Abenaki folklore from northeastern United States, specifically Maine. The creature is described as a giant, cannibalistic, half-animal, half-human creature that roamed the forests of present-day New England in ancient times. The Kawakwa is described as being a former human whose heart turned to ice, either because of evil spirit possession or because they committed a crime that was truly dreadful, like cannibalism. The only sensation the Kawakwa is able to feel is an insatiable hunger, and their existence is pretty pitiful. They are no longer claimed to exist, so there is no risk to you or me, but if you have a time machine and go back to ancient times and decide to go to New England of all places, look out for the Kawakwa. It may want to eat you. And by may want to eat you, I mean he will lick and nibble you from head to toe. Maryland. Chessie. Can you guess what this creature is going to be? Did you guess another Loch Ness Monster type creature? Could you guess because the name is completely uninspired? Well, congratulations, you have a functioning brain. Chessie, not to be confused with Nessie as in the Loch Ness Monster as in the cool one, is a reptilian type creature that is reported to be either black or brown that has been seen as early as 1936 in the Chesapeake Bay in Maryland. Not gonna go too deep on this one, pretty uninspired. Loch Ness Monster clone, Salmonella clone. Sorry, Maryland. Let's keep going. Massachusetts. Thunderbirds. The Thunderbird is a legendary creature, especially if you're a North American indigenous person who's really into art and culture. The Thunderbird is considered to be a supernatural being with supernatural power and strength. A Thunderbird can be best described as a very large eagle with supernatural powers. Some of those powers being the ability to create thunder by simply flapping its wings, and also the ability to cause lightning by flashing its eyes. The Thunderbird has very deep ties to indigenous people's history and culture, and for that reason, the history and lore is deep, and I'm definitely doing it a disservice by going over it this quickly, but it's pretty cool. 10 out of 10. Good job, Massachusetts. Michigan. The Michigan Dogman. The Michigan Dogman is essentially the Michigan equivalent of a werewolf, but it's still kind of cool. The Michigan Dogman is a cryptid that was allegedly witnessed in 1887 in the lower peninsula of Michigan. It is described as being a 7-foot tall, blue or amber-eyed bipedal canine with the torso of a man and a fearsome howl that sounds like a human screaming. According to the legend, the Michigan Dogman only appears in a 10-year cycle that falls on years ending in 7, for example, 2007, 2017, 2027. The majority of these sightings have taken place in the southern part of Michigan. And for as how ferocious and scary the Dogman may seem, many believers say that the Dogman can be scared away simply by clapping at it, which is kind of hilarious. Oh, and if you're able to scare away the Dogman without using your hands, give me a call. Only because I totally might need you to save me one day. Minnesota. The Wendigo. The Wendigo is by far one of the most well-known mythical creatures, folklore creatures, urban legends, cryptids, whatever you want to call it. If you're watching this video, you probably know about it. And honestly, for good reason. It's cool looking, the lore is deep, and it might even be real. I've already discussed it on the channel, but I'm gonna describe it again because it's really cool and I know you guys want to hear it. For starters, the Wendigo isn't just from Minnesota, it's kind of from all over the place, all across North America. I felt it was best fitting here because Minnesota was kind of slim pickings, and it was a good middle ground between all of the possible locations Wendigos could be from. The Wendigo is often said to be a malevolent spirit, sometimes depicted as a creature with human-like characteristics which possesses humans. The victims of the Wendigo feel an insatiable hunger and have the desire to eat other humans and commit horrible murders often. In some representations, the Wendigo is described as a giant humanoid with a heart of ice and whose approach is signaled by its foul stench and sudden, unseasonable chill. If this sounds familiar, it's likely because we just spoke about the Kawakwa, which is a very similar creature with its hunger and heart of ice. And I'm not sure who came first, the chicken or the egg, but I know that the Wendigo is a lot more popular. Wendigos are definitely scary and super interesting cryptids, and I would recommend looking into them deeper or maybe watching this video about mythical creatures that mentions the Wendigo. But for the scope of this mega compilation, I'm gonna cut it here. Great job, Minnesota. Mississippi. The Pascagoula River Aliens. The Pascagoula River Aliens aren't just any aliens. They are the aliens associated with the pretty famous UFO sighting and alien abduction account from 1973. For context, on the evening of October 11th, 1973, 42-year-old Charles Hickson and 19-year-old Calvin Parker told the Jackson County, Mississippi Sheriff's Office that while they were out fishing, they not only saw aliens but were abducted by them. They claimed that the aliens paralyzed them but kept them conscious and examined them for hours before later releasing them. This isn't about the abduction, but actually about the aliens themselves. These aliens were described as having robotic slit mouths and crab-like pincers. They had more or less of a humanoid body commonly associated with gray-ish aliens, but these ones seemed just a little bit different. You be the judge if specific aliens count as cryptids, but in my case they do, and honestly Mississippi was kind of dry, so I thought this was interesting. Shout out Pascagoula. Missouri. The Ozark Howler. The Ozark Howler, unsurprisingly, is said to live in the dense forests of the Ozarks, which span across Missouri, Arkansas, and Kansas. But for this segment, we're focusing on the howlers that live specifically in Missouri. The howler is typically described as being bear-sized, with a thick body, stocky legs, and black, shaggy hair, accompanied with glowing red eyes and prominent horns. Its cry is often described as being the combination of a wolf's howl and an elk's bugle, also combined with the laugh of a hyena. Sounds like a pretty horrible trio. The howler is said to be a fierce hunter and a protector of the wilderness, also with supernatural abilities and a fierce protective nature. So if you're in the Ozarks, specifically in Missouri, and you don't want to encounter the Ozark howler, respect the wilderness, don't go out at night, and if you do hear a terrifying sound, just go home. Montana. The Flathead Lake Monster. Loch Ness Monster variant, but with antlers. The coolest thing about this cryptid is a Native American legend surrounding it, which I'm going to tell now. According to legend, long ago, the first native tribe to live in the area lived in an island in the middle of the lake. One winter, while they were crossing the frozen lake to move to another camp, two girls saw antlers approximately 2 feet in length protruding from the frozen ice. Thinking the antlers belonged to some animals, the girls decided to chop them off and take them. While trying to take off these antlers with sharp rocks, the antlers started to shake and the ice split open all around them. The monster's head opened, appearing through the ice, and shook its giant antlers. These girls used special abilities to transform into balls and escape the monster, but half of their tribe drowned in that lake. That's the story. So, moral of the story, don't steal antlers you find in the ice, because if you do, you might live if you have the ability to turn into a ball, but you're gonna kill all your friends, so don't do it. Nebraska, the alkali lake monster. The alkali lake monster is a huge alligator-like horned creature that lives in, you guessed it, the alkali lake in Nebraska. It's not a direct Loch Ness monster ripoff, so that's why I'm giving it a bit more love. This monster is claimed to have rough grayish brown skin and also is 40 feet long, and like I mentioned before, it has a horn in between its eyes on its head. The legend states that this lake monster consumes livestock in large quantities, causes earthquakes, and even disorients travelers that get too close to it. According to my research, I couldn't confirm if it was believed to be supernatural or not, but I'm gonna assume it was because not many creatures cause earthquakes. Unless they're super thick, which is a completely different story. Nevada, Tahoe Tessie. Nevada's Loch Ness monster, moving on. New Hampshire, wood devils. Wood devils are believed to be one or a small group of Bigfoot-like creatures in the woodland hills of Coos County, New Hampshire. They've been spotted since the 1930s and described as tall, around 7 to 9 feet, with shaggy tan gray hair and very similar to Bigfoot's, besides the fact that they are slightly skinnier. A strange trait about this cryptid specifically is that they refuse to hide behind trees. If they are already behind a tree, they will hide behind it. But if humans are coming near them and they are not near cover, they will simply stand still and stare at you until you leave. Kind of creepy, kind of cool. That's about it. New Jersey, the Jersey Devil. The Jersey Devil is a legendary cryptid that is said to inhabit the forests of the Pine Barrens in South Jersey. This cryptid is described as a two-legged, goat-like, bat-like creature with hooves. Let me explain. The creature is said to walk on 2 hooved feet, have a goat-like body and a horse-like head with 2 large, leathery, bat-like wings on its back. It's also said to have a forked or pointed tail as well. Oh, and its hands aren't hooves, its hands actually have claws. The legend states that it moves quickly and is often described as emitting a high-pitched, blood-curdling scream. This may sound obvious, but the New Jersey Devils, the official NHL team of New Jersey, is actually named after this cryptid, which is pretty cool. Now that I think about it, this might be the first time I've ever mentioned sports in this channel, which is kind of funny. New Mexico. Teratorns. Okay, this one's a bit interesting because this is actually a real creature kind of mixed with cryptid mythology. Teratorns are prehistoric birds that were the ancestors of modern day vultures. Skeletons that have been found measure their wingspans to be over 20 feet long, and they were thought to have weighed over 100 pounds, which for a bird is insane. These birds are presumed to be extinct, but they have found numerous skeletons. Why I mention this on this list is because in New Mexico, the Thunderbird cryptid mythology that we mentioned earlier exists in New Mexico as well, and it is believed that the Thunderbirds were potentially based off of the Teratorns, which existed long before ancient peoples, but they still somehow had knowledge of them and maybe even encountered them. New York, Champ. Champ is the Loch Ness monster of Lake Champlain in New York. That's about it. North Carolina. Wampus. Wampus, or the Wampus cat, is a cryptid based in Appalachian folklore. It is described as a fearsome hybrid between a mountain lion and a woman, but kind of just displays itself as a mountain lion with 6 legs. Believers claim that the Wampus cat roams the wilderness, emitting eerie sounds to strike terror into the hearts of those who encounter it. It's simple, but kind of cool. I'll give it that. North Dakota. Thunderbirds. I don't know how I accidentally made this the same cryptid for 2 different states, and this is the 3rd mention I've had of this cryptid in this video, so yeah, Thunderbirds, woo, let's keep going. Ohio. Loveland Frogman. The Loveland Frogman is simply described as a humanoid frog creature that stands at about 4 feet tall. Honestly, more of a chill dude than a cryptid, but figured you guys would like him. Say hi, Frogman. Oh yeah. If you've made it this far, say hi Frogman in the comments to say hi to Frogman and also to confuse people that haven't made it this far yet. Oklahoma. The Oklahoma octopus. The Oklahoma octopus is a cryptid that is said to live in man-made freshwater lakes in Oklahoma where it attacks and kills unsuspecting swimmers, and that's it. Oregon. Gumbaroo. The Gumbaroo is described by early lumberjacks as being larger than a bear with tougher, shiny black skin that absolutely nothing could pierce. It is even claimed that bullets just bounce off the thing. And according to the legend, the only way to kill it is with fire. And if you set it on fire, it literally explodes. This cryptid does have a good name, so congrats, Oregon. Nice job, Gumbaroo. Pennsylvania. The Squonk. Shout out to Pennsylvania for having one of the most depressing cryptids there is. The squonk is more or less of a pig-like creature that only walks around at dusk and dawn. It is covered with extremely loose skin that is littered with warts and moles. The squonk is famously known for being perpetually unhappy and always crying, like a lot. Skilled hunters can even track down the squonk by finding its tear-stained trail. And when the squonk is concerned, frightened, or feels like it may be in danger, it can literally dissolve into a puddle of tears to escape any danger. Doesn't get much sadder than that. Rhode Island. Vampire Mercy Brown. The cryptid for this one technically is just vampires, but this story is kind of interesting and unique to Rhode Island specifically. The Mercy Brown vampire incident occurred in 1892 during what is known now as the New England Vampire Panic. At the time, tuberculosis was running rampant, and for some reason, people thought that this disease outbreak was caused by the influence of the undead. During this time, the people would perform rituals to banish the undead from our plane of existence forever. Why this is called the Mercy Brown vampire incident is because during this time, the Brown family had their daughter, Mercy, die of tuberculosis. Friends and neighbors of the Brown family believed that one of the family members was a vampire, although they didn't call them that at the time. This was in accordance to folklore at the time, which linked multiple deaths in a family to undead activity, aka vampire activity. The story goes a lot deeper, but as you know, this video is long. Rhode Island, vampires, let's keep going. South Carolina. The Gray Man. The Gray Man is a legendary cryptid from South Carolina that is considered a friendly ghost. He appears on beaches and shores, particularly before hurricanes and other strong storms. The legend states that he was on his way to propose to the love of his life when he was killed, and now his spirit wanders South Carolina, warning others of impending danger. The legend states that if you encounter the Gray Man before a storm, you will be protected and your entire house may be saved. This is a pretty interesting and potentially our first upbeat cryptid on the list, so good job, South Carolina. I like this one. South Dakota. Tekuhi. Tekuhi means big man in the Lakota language, who are the indigenous peoples of South Dakota. Tekuhi is said to be a supernatural being who serves as a guardian spirit protecting land from invaders and malevolent creatures that hunt humans and animals. He is a cryptid that protects the nature and humans and animals from other cryptids, and for that reason, he's okay in my book, which is why I discussed this Bigfoot dupe. Tennessee. The Tennessee Wildman. The Tennessee Wildman is basically the opposite of Tekuhi. Like Tekuhi, he is a 7-foot tall, dark-haired, humanoid creature, although that's about where it ends. He has piercing red eyes and screams a disturbing war cry that frightens anything that hears it. He smells awful, kind of like Bigfoot, but he is extremely aggressive. The Tennessee Wildman is extremely strong, fast, and agile, and is extremely territorial as well. He has an obsession with targeting dogs and women, and although he is typically seen trying to attack women, he has never been successful, as these women always find a way to escape. What do you guys think? Evil Bigfoot, cool or not cool? Texas. Donkey Lady. Donkey Lady is the famous cryptid said to haunt the Donkey Lady Bridge in San Antonio, Texas. According to the legend, the bridge is inhabited by the spirit of a woman who is horribly disfigured by a fire, leading to her being referred to as the Donkey Lady. It is said that she haunts the bridge, appearing to unsuspecting travelers who pass by, and the legend also states that she may even chase or attack those who get too close to her bridge. Kind of feel bad for the lady. She got made fun of for something she couldn't control, but at least she's getting revenge. Good for her. Do you, Donkey Lady. Utah. Skinwalkers. No video about cryptids is truly complete until you mention skinwalkers, and this video is no different. In Navajo culture, a skinwalker is a type of harmful witch who has the ability to turn into, possess, or disguise themselves as an animal. Skinwalkers typically use these disguises or possessions to stalk their prey and kill and attack people. They also have other supernatural abilities such as super strength and voice mimicry to lead people to their certain death. The skinwalker lore is deep and goes far beyond the scope of this video, but I have made a video discussing them in the past. They're very cool, and check them out after this video if you want. Vermont. The Northfield Pigman. The Northfield Pigman is a cryptid or urban legend from Northfield, Vermont. Descriptions of the pigman vary, but he is typically described as a humanoid creature with the body of a large pig, but with the features of a man. Sightings of the pigman have been reported across rural areas surrounding Northfield and often in the vicinity of old farmhouses or abandoned buildings. Some interpretations believe that pigman is the result of an experimentation gone wrong or a spirit of a deceased farmer seeking revenge. although the origins are still unknown and often debated. Pigman is definitely creepy and sometimes is even described as just a boy that went missing in the woods who decided to wear a pig's face as a mask. But yeah, lots of lore, kinda creepy. Good job, Vermont. Virginia, Snallygaster. Like almost every cryptid, descriptions of the Snallygaster vary, but it is often depicted as a fearsome dragon-like creature with large wings, sharp claws, and a metallic beak lined with razor-sharp teeth. According to the folklore, it preys on livestock and unsuspecting travelers, specifically children, by swooping down from the skies and snatching its victims. Some variants of the Snallygaster say it has tentacles instead of razor-sharp teeth, but either way, it's a terrifying-looking creature. Washington, the Conser Lake Monster. The Loch Ness Monster, but in Washington. West Virginia, Mothman. The legend of the cryptid known as Mothman originates from the 1960s in Point Pleasant in West Virginia. Mothman is described as a winged humanoid creature with glowing red eyes and is believed to be a sign of impending disasters. The Mothman legend has taken Point Pleasant by storm, and there is so much tourist attractions based around it, and I have covered Mothman in another video of mine, so I won't go too deep into details. But there are many stories where he is seen jumping at cars from the side of the road and jumping on the top of cars that are parked in rural locations at night. It is a creepy cryptid that showed up and almost as fast as it appeared, disappeared from the zeitgeist. It is now simply a figment of our imagination. Wisconsin, the Beast of Bray Road. The Beast of Bray Road is described as a 7-foot-tall humanoid-style creature covered in hair or fur with the head of a large wolf that also has glowing red or orange eyes. It's been seen running on 2 and 4 legs, and some reports describe it as being close to a werewolf, and others say it's more close to a Bigfoot-style cryptid. Not really a ton going on here, but what can you expect? It's Wisconsin. Just kidding, Wisconsin. I love ya. Wyoming, Jackalope. Admittedly, this is likely my favorite cryptid on the entire list, simply because I find it cute, and honestly, I hope it exists. Or at least did at one point. The jackalope is a cryptid that is described as being a rabbit with antelope horns, and that's basically it. They're pretty iconic in the Wyoming area, urban legend scene, and even pop culture as well. I know this video is alphabetical, but we kind of saved the best for last, unintentionally. And with that, bros, I have to say thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you know that I do take your feedback into consideration, and I know you guys have been asking for longer videos, and I know you guys have been asking for dark mode videos, so I thought with this video, I would give you both of those. Also, it's been a while since I talked about mythical creatures, cryptids, folklore, urban legends, all of it. So I thought, why not bring it back with this banger video? If you guys like the from every state concept, I would love to do it with more interesting topics. But with that, I'm gonna end this video here. I'm tired and I need to get a CP weepy. Thank you guys so much for watching, and as always, trust me, bro. How humans got lifted in every time period. If you've watched our videos over the last few months, then you probably know about people's obsession with obscure chemicals. And typically I'm not this coy with my verbiage, but YouTube's been giving me a real paddling lately, so I'm trying to be a good boy. With that being said, I've only really discussed chemicals people are taking in the modern day, but human consumption of obscure chemicals far predates even history itself. So in this video, I'm gonna discuss the favorite concoctions of humans in every time period and how they use them to get high. Starting in the Stone Age. The Stone Age is one of the most interesting and mysterious time periods for substance consumption. Interesting because this is where it all started, and mysterious because of how unknown it really is. We have a rough idea of what exact plants were preferred during this time period, but we don't exactly know when they were first used or how often they were used at all. Some suggest that ancient humans dating back to our ape-like ancestors were using specific plants regularly, although there's rather limited archaeological evidence to support that, and others believe that the recreational consumption didn't begin until much later in human history, like roughly 10,000 years ago, which there is slightly more evidence for. But here's the thing, just because the evidence we have available to us shows that the earliest recorded consumption began around 8100 BC, it doesn't necessarily mean that's where it actually began. That's just all we have proof of. And unlike pottery, stones, or other artifacts, these organic compounds don't preserve well. With that being said, I know you guys come to trust me bro for only the most factual, historically accurate, nothing but the truth type content. No creative liberties or stretching of any truths. We're all facts here. So with that being said, we're gonna focus on the consumption after 10,000 BC, where the invention of farming, herding, and civilization likely facilitated the use of these compounds. Or I should really just say plants. At this point in time, they're just plants. They're not even, they're just plants. But if you did want to speculate about early use, feel free to drop a comment. I'd love to open that conversation. Okay, so now that we have a framework for the timeline, what were these people in the Stone Age, or at least from 10,000 BC and beyond, getting up to? What were they lighting up? What were they chooching on? What were they fiending for? Well, I'll tell you. For starters, cannabis seeds appeared in archaeological digs dating back as far as 8100 BC in Asia. Now, does that just mean that's when it was used? It's hard to tell because the evidence doesn't suggest that, although it is possible. What we do know, however, is that in China, there was strong evidence for ritualistic use of cannabis by 500 BC, which is obviously no longer in the Stone Age, so we'll touch on that later. What we do have evidence for not only consumption but also production of in the Stone Age is alcohol, specifically beer. By 10,000 BC, the Natufians have mastered the process of making beer. And although alcoholic beverages from this time period were significantly different than what we would consider to be modern day beer, the resemblance was there. Beer from 12,000 years ago had a rather low alcohol content of only 2 to 4% and often contained additives such as fruit or honey, and most oddly, varied in consistency, from a clear liquid to a soupy mixture with floating solids and even pastes. Just imagine that. Beer soup with honey and fruit. Interesting. Researchers also suggest that there is a possibility that these people had also domesticated cereals, no, not the breakfast food, the actual grain category, for the specific purpose of brewing beer with them, instead of eating them. As strange as this early beer sounded, it actually served a dual purpose. Not only was it likely enjoyable for the people consuming it, but it also was a great alternative to water, as the alcohol in this soupy mess killed harmful bacteria that would have otherwise made these people sick. And this is going to be a trend throughout all of history, both brewing beer and also drinking alcohol to avoid dirty water. So while people in the Middle East were making beer, what was going on in North America? Well, actually a lot of things. Some of the primary and favored plants during the Stone Age were tobacco and coca. These were of course discovered and used by indigenous Americans, who not only liked their stimulants, but also had a particular fascination with psychedelics as well. Some of the available natural selection of psychedelics include peyote, morning glory, datura, salvia, ayahuasca, and over 20 different species of magic mushrooms. To me, it's no wonder that indigenous Americans were so spiritual. You could be on the prairies foraging for natural goods and come back with a basket full of 20 different types of psychedelic. Insane. One interesting tradition that the indigenous Americans had when it came to tobacco and some of these hallucinogens was nasal administration, specifically inhaling tobacco through your nose, which I can only assume must have hurt, but I guess to them it was enjoyable. They must know something we don't. One interesting piece of history is when the Spanish conquistadors visited the Mayan people, they were horrified by the Mayans' drug trips and saw it as the devil's work, which, if you know anything about Mayan history, I don't fully blame them for that, considering some of their traditions. For example, human sacrifices, skull towers, slaves made into skin suits. Stuff like that doesn't strike me as angelic, per se. But however you look at it, psychedelics were a major part of development and tradition for indigenous American people. The reason why people would use these plants varies for most of the same reasons that people do even in this day. People are looking to either ease pain, experience a pleasant sensation, connect with a higher power, gods or lost loved ones, or simply provide them more energy to hunt, work, and endure Stone Age life. One popular Stone Age plant that was used to serve all of these purposes was the coca leaf. The coca leaf was readily available and was easily consumed, primarily being mixed with lime and being chewed until they had a stimulant effect. At that point, they would spit out the leaves and do it all over again, with some people chewing this stuff all day long. Although the exact origins of specific usage isn't known, it is confirmed that some of the earliest traditions for mind-altering chemicals date back all the way to at least 10,000 BC, and some fan favorites include tobacco, coca leaves, and a bundle of psychedelics. And you can't forget beer soup. The Bronze Age. The Bronze Age is really exciting because we have a lot more facts and a much larger variety of substances to cover. The plants we discovered in the Stone Age are still around, but we now have some new discoveries as well. One of the biggest and most impactful is opium. The opium poppy was first cultivated in Southwest Asia and is one of the oldest medicinal plants in recorded history. The first mention of the opium poppy was found on Sumerian clay tablets from about 3000 BC, near the very beginning of the Bronze Age. These tablets were found at the spiritual center of the Sumerians, located just south of Baghdad, and appeared to describe the cultivation of the opium poppy, including the collection of the poppy juice in the early morning, as well as the production of opium itself. The Sumerians literally named opium gil, or happiness, a term that is still applied to opium in certain cultures today. Pretty crazy how long this stuff has been around and how influential it was. It likely is one of the most influential plants on this list. Besides opium, archaeologists also discovered well-preserved strands of human hair in a 3,000-year-old burial site in Spain, revealing trace amounts of 3 3 different alkaloid substances associated with altered states. Now, they don't exactly know what these psychoactive substances were used for, but it is speculated that they were used for recreational purposes. Another huge innovation and entry into the lifted realm was wine. Early wine has actually appeared in Egyptian pictographs, and by the early Bronze Age, the pictographs actually showed the production of wine and beer as well. And they didn't just display it as some crazy thing, they showed it like it was business as usual. This stuff has been around. At the time, wine and other alcoholic beverages were not only used for pleasure, but they were also used for nutritional, medicinal, and religious purposes. Imagine if they advertised wine that way today. In 2600 BC, a Chinese emperor was actually studying the impact of alcohol on the public's health. He was curious why people did not live as long as they did before, and one of his people claimed, "Nowadays people use wine as a beverage, and they adopt reckless and unusual behavior. They devote all their attention to amusement of their mind, thus cutting themselves off from the joys of a long life. Their rising and retiring is without regularity." It's crazy how even 5,000 years ago, alcohol was having a negative impact on people's lives, and today it's still popular as ever. At this time, China was really on some other stuff, because not only were they investigating the impacts of alcohol on the public, but they were also bringing to market some of the most influential medicines of all time. During the Bronze Age, Emperor Sheng Nong discovered a wide range of medicines almost 5,000 years ago. These included the first caffeinated tea and ephedra, which was used to make amphetamines. Emperor Shen Nong prescribed tea for malaria, rheumatism, and poor memory. Caffeinated tea was also commonly an antidote to poisonous effects of other herbs. Ephedra was a natural stimulant that helped with asthma and was probably used for other things too. There's a reason that people still reference ancient Chinese medicine today. Even back in the Bronze Age, they were really on their stuff. Besides the discoveries of opium and amphetamines and wine, there was obviously a ton of development going on with tobacco, beer, and psychedelics. Tobacco was being traded and cultivated, beer production was being improved, and shamans were using psychedelics as a gateway to the other side. Definitely an interesting time to be around. Similar to the Stone Age, all of these substances had similar purposes, with a primary focus on religious and medicinal benefits, of course with some leisure mixed in there as well. The Iron Age. At this point, human development is ramping up to full speed, and honestly, a lot of the plants that we've discussed are still very much favored and very much so in use, with the only real difference being the scale of production and cultivation, as well as the documentation of their benefits and use cases. One of the most commonly cited plants that we see in the Iron Age is something you're likely familiar with. It may be something you're enjoying right now, that being cannabis. During this time in history, cannabis use was widespread, and use cases vary drastically, and some of them are kind of funny. In Mesopotamia, several clay tablets were found in a library that contained references to cannabis. Most of these references indicated the plants were used for either magical healing purposes or to drive away evil spirits or even illnesses, which is interesting. On the contrary, over in China, the use of cannabis in medicine was very early in its development. But according to a famous early book on Chinese herbal medicine, known as the Divine Farmer's Matura Medicina, cannabis, if taken in excess, will produce hallucinations, literally seeing devils. On the other hand, moderate use over a long time has benefits. If taken over a long time, it will make one communicate with spirits and lightens one's body. Definitely an interesting interpretation of the plant, and I feel like they were smoking some strong stuff. During this time, opium is also traded among the Silk Road. No, not that Silk Road, the actual Silk Road. And I think one of my favorite pieces of history from this time period is this. In the year 3 BC, there was a drinking contest in Greece that led to the death of 41 people. It is reported that a Greek drinking contest revealed that 41 contestants died of alcohol poisoning. Oddly enough, the winner did not die, at least not immediately. He actually took home prizes which included more wine, but he only lived for 4 more days before dying. Absolutely insane that there was drinking contests in 3 BC, and also the fact that so many people died at the same contest. That is wild. Near the end of the Iron Age, alcohol became the prominent psychoactive substance during the Roman Empire. Catholic Christianity became the state church of the Roman Empire, and since alcohol was often produced by abbeys and monasteries, it became the people's favorite. During this time, we weren't just limited to beer or wine. They also had introduced cider and mead as well. And it was also around 100 BCE when Rome had caught up with Greece in wine production and trade. One interesting artifact that was found in the Iron Age are stones carved into mini mushrooms by the Guatemalans. A set of 9 mushrooms was found that is believed to be associated with the 9 lords of the night and gods of the underworld. One study of these miniature sculptures suggests that these stones may have been used to grind up the mushrooms to prepare them for ceremonial consumption, which is cool, but it's also crazy that they also depicted 9 lords of an underworld on their mushroom carving. They must have been seeing some stuff. It was also at this time when Plato argued that alcohol is a good test of someone's character. Plato argued that drinking with someone is the simplest, fastest, and most reliable way to test someone's character. This is because wine stimulates the emotion, including desires or pleasures of questionable moral worth. So if you want to get to know someone else's character, or even your own character, according to Plato, get drunk. Interestingly, in Asia, the Persian king advised his army to take advantage of their opponent's lack of experience of alcohol to defeat them, and literally used feast and alcohol as a military strategy. The idea was if the Persians were able to provide their enemies with large, generous portions of lamb and large amounts of wine in which they had no experience with, they would become so infatuated with the feast and compelling feeling of this drink that they would be too distracted to even compete with the Persians in accomplishing great things. Definitely an interesting strategy. Chewing coca leaves was still popular as ever in the Iron Age, and they even discovered multiple ceramic figures depicting characters chewing coca leaves from 500 BC. So if you wanted to know how people got lifted in the Iron Age, the Greeks and Romans were literally turning into frat bros, drinking until they died. People in Asia were smoking until they saw the devil, and people in Guatemala were taking mushrooms until they saw the 9 lords of the underworld. I think the most normal thing to come out of this time period and their psychoactive substances is Plato's analysis on alcohol. It definitely was a funny time. The medieval era. One of the craziest substances we've talked about on this list is now about to be revealed. Technically, it was used at the end of the Iron Age and at the beginning and during the Middle Ages, but I wanted to add it here because this chemical is just so crazy and so insane. What I'm talking about, of course, is cacao, also known as chocolate. During this time, from roughly 250 AD to 900 AD, there was an abundance of physical and symbolic traces of cacao and chocolate left behind, specifically by the Mayan people. This evidence includes both physical evidence of cacao residue left on vessels, basically little pottery bowls and stuff, as well as cacao being mentioned directly on scriptures. It was believed that cacao was used for social, religious, and, once again, ritualistic factors, which is interesting. It kind of reminds me of like that live-action Charlie the Chocolate Factory movie, where they're in the forest with the Oompa Loompas, like when he first makes connection with them and they're like having this religious connection to the cacao plant. It's basically like that. Maybe that's what it was inspired by. But yeah, the Mayans were loving their chocolate. Around 900 AD, we also see the first mention of coffee in print. This was found printed by a Persian physician in Iran. And it's interesting how long it took us to get from tea to coffee. But yeah, another crazy psychoactive substance. So far, they're just having the average morning meal. Nothing too crazy so far. The travels of Marco Polo from roughly 1200 AD noted that rice wine was actually more popular than grape wine in China, saying, quote, "Most of the people in China drink wine of a kind that I shall not describe. It is a liquor which they brew of rice with a quantity of excellent spice, in such a fashion that it makes better drink than any other kind of wine." I guess it kind of makes sense geographically why they would prefer rice wine over a grape wine, but it's interesting that somebody who was used to grape wine actually preferred rice wine. He also made sure to note that, quote, "Rice wine makes one drunk sooner than any other wine." China was really just living it up at this time. They were smoking until they saw devils, and they were drinking until they could not anymore. Well, maybe not anymore. That was the Greeks. The Greeks were drinking to death, but China was probably in close second. It was around this time we also started to see the prohibition of certain substances, specifically cannabis in the Middle East. Wine and gambling at this time were explicitly prohibited in the Quran, but there was no specific text that gave guidance on hashish or cannabis. The general legal attitude was that cannabis should be banned despite the fact that it was widely used among Muslim populations. Occasionally, governments tried to take a drastic step against it, but with little success. From 1223 to 1277, there was a prohibition on wine and cannabis that involved the death penalty for those who used either. But it's noted that this prohibition didn't stop consumption and only caused the killing and maiming of people. So, although they were trying to get rid of wine and weed, one thing that they were ramping up production of was coffee. During this time, the first coffee trees were being cultivated on the Arabian Peninsula. And at first, coffee was used for medicinal and religious purposes, like many chemicals of this time. Funnily enough, the way that this was used for religious purposes was claimed that it would be used to help people stay awake during long religious ceremonies, which to me is hilarious because it's like, here, take this. This is going to be long and boring. But hey, if it works, it works. Honestly, medieval times seems like a pretty chill time with a lot of cool innovations like chocolate and coffee, and also some interesting attempts at prohibition. I think it's safe to say that at this time, the most common substance of choice was definitely alcohol, as its recreational use was ramped up significantly. I think one interesting example that showcases this pretty well is the fact that they used distilled spirits as a prescribed medicine during the Black Death. During the mid-1300s, distilled spirits were prescribed by doctors during the Black Plague, with the thought that it would help them fight off the disease internally. Ironically, this led to a lot of overconsumption of alcohol because people wanted to be extremely cautious, which is just kind of ironic and hilarious to think that people would be chugging essentially medieval vodka to help protect them from a extremely deadly disease. I guess at that point, if you're gonna go out, at least go out happy. Medieval times, dope. The early modern era. The early modern era is an extremely exciting time for people enlightening themselves, specifically because there is so much recorded evidence of different use cases, prohibitions, legalizations, declarations, and other recorded events associated with different psychoactive chemicals. And spoiler alert, there's not a ton of new introductions. However, the use cases of the chemicals and plants that we've described so far have definitely taken a change and now have adapted some interesting relationships with different cultures. For starters, in 1475 AD in Turkey, the world's first coffee shop was opened, which is really cool to think that coffee shops have been around for so long. Over in Europe, the introduction of the printing press has allowed a broader distribution of information about alcohol, which is a huge win for safety. For a short period of time, coffee was actually banned in Mecca, as it was claimed to be an intoxicant, and the governor of Mecca actually shut down all of the coffee houses, although shortly after his superior overruled him and opened them back up. Excitingly, cacao had made its way over to Europe, first at Spain and then the rest of Europe. The first official voyage of cacao got delivered from modern-day Mexico to modern-day Spain in 1585, and at the time, cacao was served as a drink. Also at this time, smoking was introduced to the Europeans from indigenous Americans. Initially, Spanish friars in the Caribbean and Mexico believed that tobacco was the devil's weed, and the traditional indigenous smoking of it was sinful. However, French and English voyagers took note of the practice of smoking tobacco and brought the idea back home to Europe, where it quickly spread across Europe, Middle East, Africa, and Asia. It's almost hard to imagine Europe without tobacco at this point. Shortly after the popularization of tobacco, once again, during the plague, physicians were recommending tobacco as a disinfectant, and even stated that people who smoked tobacco regularly had lower rates of infection. And one of the funniest things is that Pope Clement VIII declared coffee as a Christian drink, specifically because most people associated it with Islamic culture, because it was brought to Europe by traders from the Middle East. It's stated that Pope Clement tried coffee for the first time and then decreed it as a Christian drink, which is kind of hilarious. Could you imagine being a trader from the Middle East, bringing a gift to the Pope, sharing your culture with him, watching him try it for the first time and seeing the delight on his face, only for him to instantly decree, yes, this is great. This is a Christian drink. Thank you. Thank you so much for this Christian drink. And they're like, actually, we've been, you know what, sure. Crazy, but, you know, times were different. During this time, prohibitions are popping up and down everywhere, and coffee houses are exploding. Not literally, just they're getting popular. Maybe a few exploded, I don't know. In 1663, English coffee houses were actually required to be licensed. And in 1676, the first coffee house opened up in Boston. And believe it or not, it wasn't a Starbucks. During the 30-year War, Dutch soldiers kept bottles of what was known as Dutch courage on their belt, which was actually a flask of gin. During these battles, the British actually took note and began doing the same thing as well, which I don't blame them. If I was in a war that was 30 years long, I think I'd be sipping a little bit too. Tobacco prohibition was happening in both Russia and Japan, although in Japan it was relatively short-lived. So yeah, during the early modern era, the legendary combo of coffee and cigarettes was booming, essentially all over the world. And although some people wanted to ban it, there was really no way to go about it, as the trade was booming, and people wanted their caffeine and nicotine bad. It's so interesting to see the first discovery of a plant, and then worldwide stores selling a product made from this plant pop up in the matter of 100 years. That's just, to me, so cool to see. Humans are honestly awesome, and that's why I love these time period videos. But we're still not done yet. The modern era. One of the first and most significant events that took place was the London gin craze. The English took their interest in Dutch courage a little bit too far, because now, after the king and parliament encouraged the production of gin to increase the price of grain and provide tax revenue, this resulted in the price of gin dropping dramatically, which exponentially boosted the consumption, particularly among the poor. Now that the gin was so cheap, any regular old person could afford to maintain a solid buzz 24/7, and this was causing havoc among the British people. I think there was a lot of reasons to drink during the early 1700s, especially in London. Religious dissent, rebellion, corrupt politicians, displaced people, all factors that were contributing to an unstable society. People were packed in tight, small, dirty rooms. Living and working conditions sucked. Most people were poor, so if there was any sort of joy or escape that you could afford, why wouldn't you? The upper class blamed the production of gin for all of the issues that British society was having, but realistically, the consumption of gin was only because of how low the quality of life was at this time. The government did eventually begin to control the gin craze through a series of what was known as gin acts. That alone is a pretty crazy start to the modern era. In 1832, a French chemist was the first person to isolate codeine, which is an alkaloid of the naturally occurring opium that at this point has been used for hundreds of years. Codeine is still widely used today, and in modern times is synthesized from morphine through a chemical process. Moving over to China, Emperor Yang Cheng prohibited the sale of opium for smoking. It was still legal to use medicinally, but if you were using it recreationally, you were killed. Although this didn't really have an impact on any of the trade routes or consumption because officials were for the most part corrupt and the demand and supply chain was stronger than the government could keep up with. A separate French chemist also discovered morphine, which, like codeine, comes from the opium plant and is still used heavily to this day. And during the early 1800s, it was prescribed by physicians often for pain relief. But by the 1870s, physicians began to express concerns because of the morphine habit that it was causing, which is, of course, a pretty severe addiction. In 1869, the Prohibition Party was established in the United States of America, which was essentially looking to achieve widespread social reform about alcohol, and wanted to have legislation that would prohibit the sale and manufacturing of alcohol in the US. And seemingly one by one, countries began to prohibit different substances for different reasons. It's also at this time that we see a lot of interesting companies pop up. For example, Folgers Coffee Company was founded in 1850. Miller Brewing Company was founded in 1855. Lipton Tea was established in 1890. And Coca-Cola was invented in 1886. Besides companies popping up, we also see a lot of drugs popping up. We saw amphetamines being introduced. We saw LSD synthesized in the late 1930s. We saw oxycodone first synthesized in the 1910s. And in the 1940s, people in Japan got their first taste of meth. I wonder where they got it from. What were Japan and Germany up to in the 1940s? The modern day is honestly a super interesting time because we see the industrialization of all of these compounds that, for the most part, have been around for hundreds and thousands of years. And not only do we see a lot of companies pop up, but we also see a lot of legislation, specifically regarding to temperance and regulation. And we also see the first introduction of a lot of synthetic, or at least processed chemicals that we now would consider to be pharmaceuticals. It's truly crazy how fast things have developed. And I guess these are all more or less of a byproduct of the Industrial Revolution, which I would consider to be a huge landmark in civilization and human history as a whole. I bet you guys are curious about what are the craziest, scariest, and deadliest examples of drugs that people are taking in the modern day. And if that's something that interests you, then I have something for you. But unfortunately, it's not in this video. On screen right now, I want you to watch this playlist about the craziest drugs you've never heard of, in which I go into detail about specific chemicals and drugs that people are taking in the modern day. And if you haven't seen them yet, then I would definitely recommend giving them a watch because it's crazy some of the things that people are making and taking today. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. And as always, trust me, bro. Even crazier drugs that you've never heard of. A couple weeks ago, I decided to compile a list of the weirdest, most obscure, and most unheard of drugs on the infinitely deep iceberg known as the internet. That video's list was only 5 drugs long, but honestly, 5 drugs doesn't even scratch the surface of this monstrous iceberg. So today, I'm here to bring you the much anticipated part 2. If you haven't watched part 1, don't worry, you can watch it after this video. It's a great video, but it's not a requirement to watch this video. As I did say in the last video, these videos are a product of me venturing down hundreds of rabbit holes on the craziest drug forums and websites I could find. Regardless, the wait is finally over. Let's get right into the list. Number 1, EA3167. No, not EA Sports. It's in the game. EA3167. Close though. What happens when you create some type of mad scientist coalition of some of the best chemical engineers and scientists in the world, paired with billions of dollars in backing from the United States military budget? Well, you get a chemical weapon that's so brutal even Darth Sidious would be impressed. This wartime designer drug, and I'm not even exaggerating, might be the most extreme non-lethal drug I have ever heard of. In all honesty, this atrocity of a chemical is so ungodly and just plain eerie that it's inconceivable to me why this has even been created in the first place. Like, I can't even understand who would bother imagining such an unnecessary extreme compound to begin with. First, let's begin with some context. EA3167 is what would be known as a deliriant. If you've ever seen a YouTube video on what it's like to take too much Benadryl, such as seeing shadow people and spiders everywhere, forgetting everyone you know and not remembering how to read anymore, having hallucinations that you can't differentiate from real life, and sometimes forgetting language entirely, the effects of these large Benadryl doses happen because it's a deliriant drug. In general, Benadryl is effective at treating allergies, fever, and flu-like symptoms. But as many of you know, in high doses, Benadryl starts to get super unpleasant, to put it mildly. This is because in high doses, Benadryl is what they call an anticholinergic. Or, in non-nerd terms, it makes your memory about 80 times worse than Joe Biden's. Right, but why is Benadryl anticholinergic? Well, because it's old. Benadryl was released for prescription in 1946, which means that Benadryl is turning 78 in 2024. I'm guessing when scientists discovered it, they were too caught up with all of the stuff that it cured to think about the fact fact that it crossed the blood-brain barrier to begin with. They were probably like, why does that matter? It's not like anybody over the age of 8 is going to take a bunch of allergy pills to get high off of. Actually, that's exactly what happened. But like I said, old antihistamines such as Benadryl and other designer deliriants like EA3167 happen to cross the blood-brain barrier, which blocks your brain's ability to use acetylcholine, which is really bad. That's because acetylcholine helps regulate things like sleep, wakefulness, memory, and focus. So basically, getting exposed makes you feel like you're literally going insane. And from everybody else's perspective, you just look like an idiot. You'll try to walk into doors that aren't there, talk to invisible people that aren't even around you, run from invisible spiders and shadow people, and most likely try to use your computer, forget your password, and get so pissed off that you punch the imaginary spider on your screen. However, let me be clear, Benadryl is not fun to abuse. Most people that try to use it in high doses recreationally end up being traumatized at some point, and long-term abuse can lead to early dementia. If you don't believe me, watch a couple Benadryl trip reports on YouTube and come to your own conclusion. Now that we have a better understanding, let's talk about EA3167, the drug in question for this list. In the 1960s, the US government had a new goal, and that was to make bioweapons that didn't necessarily kill people, but incapacitated them for days. This program was known as the US Military Chemical Weapons Program, and one interesting result of this program was a contract with Edgewood Arsenal, who eventually developed the psychological war crime of a drug. EA316 has the exact same effects as 3-QNB, but it lasts way longer. And unlike 3-QNB, which was just accidentally discovered, EA3167 was purposely developed and designed to be terrifying. In both of these drugs, the effect is simple. It incapacitates your brain's ability to use acetylcholine, which, like I said earlier, is essential for memory and not going insane. If somebody wants to get you to do this stuff, they probably will. It's a white, crystalline, odorless powder, completely soluble in most liquids, including water, and has delayed symptoms several hours after contact. It also has a half-life of 3 to 4 weeks in moist air, which means that your enemy could spike your food with it and wait weeks until you eat it. It also lasts a really long time in soil. If you happen to get drugged with this stuff, you're basically going to lose your mind. According to official sources, common symptoms include both, quote, psychological and physiological effects, with the most incapacitating effect being the state of delirium characterized by cognitive dysfunction, hallucinations, and the inability to perform basic tasks. What's crazy about 3-QNB is that the US military designed a specific cluster bomb called the M44 generator cluster, which basically sent a bunch of flying gas canisters down on your enemy, creating a visible white cloud of doom. And if you got caught in it, you would become incapacitated anywhere from a couple hours to a couple of days. But that was just phase 1 of this drug. The final supervillain form of this drug, EA3167, was basically what you would call super Benadryl, because if Benadryl turns you into a vegetable, this stuff turns you into bedrock. Ingesting a tiny amount will give you a bad Benadryl-like trip, but only requires 0.2 milligrams for an average weight person, and it lasts anywhere from 5 to 10 days, with many users saying they needed 20 days to fully recover. So basically, it's akin to a 10 to 20 day long Benadryl overdose. Or in other words, it's actually like going clinically insane for at least 10 days, not remembering how to speak, how to walk, how to read, what the layout of your house was, or anything else really. Considering military leaders were planning on drugging enemies with the stuff from a handshake, if you were incapacitated by EA3167, you would probably believe that you had permanently lost your mind. And the worst part is, you would have no idea what was wrong with you. Also, because acetylcholine is the most important neurotransmitter for REM sleep, your brain would get very confused and no longer be able to tell the difference between reality and dream. In fact, this is why your hallucinations are so strong on anticholinergic drugs. They simply put your brain into a REM-like sleep state while you're still awake. So what you see and what's actually real become indistinguishable in the worst ways possible. And because of this, in my opinion, that's what makes this one of the cruelest chemical warfare drugs ever invented. But wait, it gets worse. Because for some cruel reason, the US military thought it was a bright idea to test this drug on human subjects. And sadly, some people simply never recovered from the terror of losing their ever-loving mind for 10 to 20 days. For example, one source states, quote, even 6 months after exposure, a few subjects demonstrated significant increases in the scores of depression, hysteria, schizophrenia, and mania scales. In other words, if you got drugged with this stuff, it's a pretty good chance that you'll never be the same. And even worse is you might permanently lose your mind. Number 2. Galantamine. This drug is deep on the drug iceberg, but not because of how obscure it is. In fact, some people already know about galantamine because it is often used to treat Alzheimer's. But what not everybody knows is what niche internet communities use it for. which I'll be getting into. But first, let's talk about how galantamine works. Remember the chemical weapon we were just talking about? Well, this chemical is actually the exact opposite. Galantamine is what you would call a cholinergic drug, which basically means that it increases acetylcholine in your brain, which in turn improves your memory, wakefulness, and focus. So unlike anticholinergics, it makes you the opposite of a vegetable. So, a fruit? This is really helpful for people with Alzheimer's, but it also has another even crazier use. Like I mentioned earlier, acetylcholine is a super important neurotransmitter for REM sleep. Well, because of the effects these drugs have on your cholinergic system, Benadryl makes you asleep when you're awake. And by asleep, I mean a waking nightmare. But cholinergic drugs like galantamine make you awake when you're asleep. And because of this quality, people on the internet have figured out that if you go to sleep and then set an alarm 4 to 6 hours after you fall asleep to catch yourself in the middle of a REM cycle, take 4 to 8 milligrams of galantamine, and then quickly go back to sleep before the galantamine kicks in, the galantamine will take effect on your brain while you're in the dream, which will give you about a 50% higher chance of lucid dreaming. And if you don't know what lucid dreaming is, it's basically realizing that you're in a dream and pretty much doing whatever you want, like flying, gaining superpowers, or even walking around the corner and hoping that your brain will make your celebrity crush appear. And considering it makes your memory and focus better, most people that have tried this method for lucid dreaming say that the galantamine makes their dreams feel like they're dreaming in 4K. Basically, used during the daytime, galantamine is a mild limitless pill, and used during the nighttime, it's like the red pill from the Matrix. Interestingly, this chemical being used for lucid dreaming has also been studied, and one study called, quote, pre-sleep treatment with galantamine stimulates lucid dreaming, concludes that, quote, the percentage of participants who reported a lucid dream was significantly increased for both 4 milligrams and 8 milligram doses of galantamine. But this isn't really deep enough for a video titled 5 Crazy Drugs You've Never Heard of, so I want to go a level deeper. There are actually people who take specifically designed stacks of nootropics, which are basically just legal supplements that affect your brain's functionality, in order to get the clearest, most vivid, and long-lasting dreams imaginable. I honestly don't know what to call these people, because they're not exactly psychonauts, but at the same time, they're still using drugs to explore the deepest depths of their subconscious. So I guess they're somewhere in between. According to some of these shaman-like dream gurus who I've talked to, apparently one of the wildest activities to do in a lucid dream isn't any of the crazy stuff you would imagine, like fighting your mortal enemy with superpowers, shape-shifting, or flying. Apparently, it's just meditating. Now, I know this sounds crazy, but these people have told me that the most fascinating thing to do in a dream once you realize that you're dreaming is to just stop and observe it. They look at the people passing by, they read a newspaper, and they listen to the random characters in their dreams having in-depth conversation. According to them, the state of awareness that they are in during these lucid dreams is more than the awareness they experience in their waking life. Colors are bright and vivid, like how they used to look when we were kids, and every other sense, such as smell, touch, and taste, is in HD. Some people theorize that this is because the brain experiences different brain waves or states of consciousness in different phases of sleep. For example, REM sleep is the state in which you dream. So basically, being aware in a dream is different from being aware in real life, because once you become aware in your dream, your mind is already at a super low state of consciousness, which would typically take years of practice to achieve regularly. In fact, many cultures throughout history have practiced this dream enhancement with various substances long before galantamine was ever invented. For example, Tibetan monks have been practicing dream yoga as a meditation technique for hundreds of years. Similarly, African tribes have used something called the African dream route to induce lucid dreams as well. Finally, one user on a popular lucid dreaming forum wrote about what it was like to use galantamine, in which he states, quote, I set my alarm for 6 hours after I was going to wake up when I went to sleep. When I woke up, I took 4 milligrams of galantamine pills and 2 choline pills, downed some water, and went right back to sleep. After some time of tossing and turning, I decided to fall asleep on my stomach, like I usually do. And just as I was falling asleep, I suddenly felt pressure on my body, like someone put a very heavy blanket over me. I'm pretty sure this was sleep paralysis. Usually at this point, I have a hard time staying awake. But because the galantamine kicked in just in time, I felt vibrant and awake even though my body was now asleep. I stayed in my bed, simply observing this feeling. And then, in an instant, I suddenly realized my body had drifted out of my real-life body. This is probably the coolest sensation I've ever experienced. Suddenly, anything I imagined was perfectly visible, as if I were looking at a 3D TV screen. Then, I imagined my fingers touching a familiar texture, and suddenly I was looking down and my hands were touching the object I had just imagined, and an expansive town constructed itself around me. Somehow, everything I could see, hear, smell, and touch was more vivid than I remembered real life to be. And upon my first attempt of flying, I was flying around this new city. I specifically remember a point where I was close to a cloud cloud, looking down at the city, and I was just staring in disbelief at how realistic and accurate my dream was looking and feeling. I could feel the wind from flying, and everything I touched had an accurate texture. What's more is that any music I imagined synthesized right in my dream. For a moment, I felt like Hans Zimmer orchestrating an entire original composition that sounded even better and more out of this world than anything I've ever heard in my life. What felt like 2 hours for me exploring the city went by, and at a certain time I began to get worried. It felt like my brain had notified me that I should have woken up by now. But I remembered that the galantamine was probably causing a dream lasting longer than it would naturally. Shortly after this, I promptly woke up and I looked at my clock and only 30 minutes have gone by. That was the longest dream I've ever had. Because I wanted to mix things up, this is one of the only drugs on the list that isn't necessarily an instant death and horror drug. It's a bit different. But with that being said, I do not in any way, shape, or form condone using Alzheimer's drugs recreationally. But the science and story behind it is interesting. But if you want to elevate your senses without having to set an alarm for 4 in the morning, today's sponsor, 5CBD, is perfect for you. There are a lot of different ways to use THC: smoking, dabs, the Benjamin, but all of them have shortcomings. Either they smell bad, taste bad, aren't discreet, or worst of all, you have to keep hitting them every 45 minutes or so to keep the good vibes going. OG Kush is great, but it has hundreds of cannabinoids hitting you all at once. With 5CBD products, you can choose which specific cannabinoid effect you want. For example, their gummies have 50 milligrams of CBD, 10 milligrams of THC, and a special cannabinoid that changes based on what you're looking for. Their Surge gummies are perfect if you want energy, thanks to the sativa. Their Vibes gummy has CBG to keep you awake but relaxed. And their Chill gummies have CBN, which is more of an indica to keep you relaxed and help you sleep. Additionally, you'll never have to inhale any smoke. And unlike the Benjamin, 5CBD products last upwards of 3 hours, which makes it perfect for a Friday night or Sunday afternoon. And if you live in a strict state, don't worry, because even the wildest 5CBD products are shippable to all 50 states nationwide. So if you want to chill legally in your state, use my link in the description to get gummies for free. Just cover shipping. And yes, customers must be 21 and over to purchase. Use my link in the description to get your first gummies absolutely free when you cover shipping. Thank you so much to 5 for sponsoring this video. Number 3. Flubromazolam. For the sake of simplicity, we'll just call this drug Flubro. This drug falls under a category of drugs known as triazolobenzodiazepines, which is pretty much just a fancy word for research chemical benzos. And at that, it's one of the strongest benzodiazepines in the world. What's crazy is that it has a half-life of 50 to 20 hours, which means that if someone using this drug takes even a tiny bit too much, they're pretty much guaranteed to spend the next day or two blacked out. And I'm not talking about blacked out as in sleepwalking around like a confused Xan fiend not remembering anything you did yesterday. I'm talking about going into a straight up hibernation for 48 hours. In fact, now that I think about it, a good way to put this drug would be Xanax on steroids. Research chemicals are so strong that most of the time, even the most seasoned research chemical enthusiasts steer far away from this stuff. To give you some perspective on how crazy this drug is, I want to talk about how extreme regular benzos are. One good example of this is a Joe Rogan episode where Jordan Peterson explains how severe his benzo addiction was. He recounts how his doctor prescribed him Xanax in 2019 because he couldn't sleep. He started taking them without thinking too much about it. Then in 2022, he attempted to get off of them for the first time, which caused him neurological damage and gave him severe withdrawals. In this episode, Joe Rogan also talks about how a doctor told him that Xanax was one of the hardest drugs to get off of, and how it can turn an everyday person into a severely dependent addict in a matter of weeks. Joe also goes on to tell him about another doctor that told him that there are only 2 drugs that can kill you if you get off of them, those being alcohol and benzodiazepines. It's crazy to think that these drugs can literally kill you if you stop taking them. Regardless, after Dr. Peterson undertook months of unsuccessful treatment in American hospitals in an attempt to slowly wean himself off the drug, he finally had to go to a hospital in Russia and undergo a medically induced coma for 8 days just to deal with the withdrawals of Xanax. When talking about Xanax withdrawal, Peterson says trying to get off of them was the lowest point in his life. So just to put this all into perspective, let me present you with one user I found on a popular Swedish drug forum who talks about how Flubro withdrawal is at least 10 times worse than Xanax. He states that, quote, "In just 1 week on these, at 1 tablet a day, I got the strongest withdrawals imaginable. If you thought Xanax was bad, Flubro is at least 10 times worse." So if you think quitting nicotine is hard, imagine a withdrawal that's 10 times worse than one that required an 8-day coma to escape from. Users on this forum also go on to describe the withdrawals in more detail. Quote, when you're withdrawing from Flubro, you can just forget about sleep if you don't have any other strong medicines. I had to get more Flubro again after being sleepless for 3 nights. The worst part was my body and mind felt exhausted, like I wanted to sleep, but it just felt like something was wrong, like there was something preventing me from falling asleep. This user then states, quote, I've been on benzos for 15 years. But 1 week of Flubro is literally costing me my life. This substance is absolutely not to be played with. Then another user commented, quote, I've been on benzos for 10 years. I got such an extreme withdrawal from these that I was borderline psychotic. The withdrawals were so bad that ever since that withdrawal, I decided to stop taking benzos forever, and I am currently tapering off them now. We all know Xanax addiction can make you spend months of your life essentially blacked out, not remembering anything. But because of Flubro's ridiculously long half-life, month-long blackouts on this drug are on a completely different level. To demonstrate what I mean, on a benzo drug forum, one user states, quote, Flubro blacked me out for literally months at a time. As a user, you know all of the consequences that come with benzos, getting fired, crashing your car, and spending money that you don't have. Now, crank that up exponentially. And you know the withdrawals you get? Those get cranked up too. I tried to withdraw at home, and I endured 2 weeks of wasting away before my mind snapped and I went into a full-blown psychosis and woke up in detox. I am not messing around with you when I say that this will ruin your life. And I'm not your mother, so I'm not going to tell you what to do, but I'm just telling you what's going to happen. It's turning yourself into an evil zombie and pain will follow. So yeah, benzos alone are scary enough, but these research benzos are on a different level of terrifying. Number 4. MPTP. In my last video, we talked about 4-CMA, which infamously kills your serotonin neurons. Well, in this video, we're going to talk about another neurotoxic drug that's possibly worse, MPTP. Like many of the chemicals on this list, this is a research chemical, which means that it was developed in a lab and doesn't have enough historic testing and research to be considered reliable or safe. What's interesting about MPTP is that it's usually created as an accidental byproduct when trying to synthesize another research chemical known as MPPP. In 1976, a 23-year-old chemistry graduate named Barry Kidston was doing just that. Because MPPP gave similar effects to morphine, Kidston was producing it in a lab for personal consumption. What nobody knew at the time, however, was that when you synthesize MPPP, it comes with the risk of being contaminated by MPTP as a byproduct. Interestingly, MPTP isn't neurotoxic on its own, but it is the chemical precursor to MPP+. Once MPTP enters your blood-brain barrier, your brain turns it into MPP+, which is a potent neurotoxin that is guaranteed to kill your dopamine neurons permanently. So, without knowing any of this, Barry Kidston synthesized his MPPP in a lab, and when he was ready, he injected it into himself. Sources say that within 3 days, Barry had developed Parkinson's. He was treated with another dopamine precursor known as L-Dopa, but unfortunately he died from a cocaine overdose just a year later. Some people speculate that Kidston might have been taking cocaine to self-medicate his Parkinson's. What's scary is this isn't the only case of this happening. For example, in 1983, quote, 4 people in Santa Clara County, California, United States were diagnosed with Parkinson's after having used MPPP contaminated with MPTP, and as many as 120 more were reported to have been diagnosed with Parkinson's symptoms. All in all, this is a terrible drug, and just like 4-CMA, it was never really intended to be taken, but it still ended up being accidentally consumed anyway. Honestly, I can't decide whether destroying your dopamine-producing neurons or your serotonin-producing neurons is worse, but either way, taking MPPP is a horrible idea considering the risk that it will turn into MPTP, and from that will almost guarantee you get Parkinson's. Not many drugs that I've found have such strong, lifelong effects. I don't think I need to go into much more detail about what makes this chemical absolutely terrifying. No matter what you do, never even think about touching 4-CMA or MPTP or MPPP or any research chemical or anything at all. Don't even drink water. At this point, I'm basically terrified of everything because these drugs are insane. But we still have one more, and it's the craziest I've touched on by far. But quickly, before we get to this last drug, I do have a confession. In the process for researching for this video, I found a lot of other drugs I wanted to discuss that just wouldn't fit in this video. And I know this was only supposed to be a part 2, and it's gonna be a 2-video series, and that's it. But seeming as you guys really enjoy this video, I thought I would leave it up to you. If you want to see a part 3, let me know. Leave a like, and if we get to 50,000 likes, we'll drop a part 3. Admittedly, these videos are risky for YouTube, but you guys do love them, so if I can entertain you guys, to me, it's worth the risk. Now, let's finish this video strong with this absolutely diabolical particle. Number 5. DPT. DPT is a drug that is generally just a bad deal to agree to. If you happen to have a good trip, most trip reports will just say it will be alright. But if you happen to have a bad trip, which is more of a rule than an exception with this chemical, most people agree that it's the worst psychedelic experience they've ever had. In the last drug video, part 1, I said that 5-MeO-DMT was basically DMT's mysterious grandfather. And that's true. But what I didn't tell you is that 5-MeO-DMT was just scratching the surface of DMT analogs. And this form of DMT, DPT, is more akin to the ghost that haunts DMT's mysterious grandfather. This is the next level down the DMT iceberg that not everyone knows about. Now, let's make one thing clear. DPT is not natural. It has never been found in any toad venom, any tree bark, or anywhere in the known universe thus far. And in my opinion, God was probably facepalming hard when he saw humans first make this stuff. That's probably because if you take a high enough dose, your trip can last up to 12 hours. You see, when you make a psychedelic drug in a lab and it's nowhere to be found in nature, all of those hippie arguments of, "It's just a plant, bro," made by the guy who looks like Shaggy from Scooby-Doo wearing a weed-scented tie-dye carpet he bought at the Dollar General, just goes out the window. Another interesting fact about this cursed drug is that an entire cult was created around it. I'm serious. If we're being honest, you know the drug is insane when people think this drug is God. And I'm not joking, that's literally what happened. This cult is called the Temple of the True Inner Light. And the actual temple is unsurprisingly based in New York City. And if you think this sounds like some type of crazy science fiction plot, you wouldn't be wrong. It's weird because everyone talks about Scientology in LA, but somehow an NYC cult temple that worships a synthesized research chemical variant of DMT that can't even be found in nature just slips under the radar. Anyways, on their website, which is kind of hard to find, they go into detail about what they actually believe. Quote, "It is our belief that the origin of religion and spiritual awakening is the ingestion of psychedelics. In other words, the original followers of every true religion, such as Buddhism, Judaism, Christianity, Islam, believed that psychedelics are the embodiment of God. This was and is the God of the ancient prophets and messengers. And this is the light spoken of in scriptures and sacred texts. What's even crazier is that they smoke DPT in oil form, and they even have their own religious text referring to their God as oil. For example, on their website, they have one of their own scriptures that says, quote, "I am writing to you about those who would deceive you, but the oil you received from him remains within you, and you really need no teaching from anyone. Simply remain in him. For this oil teaches you about everything, and is true, and is no lie. Remain in him, as his oil has taught you to do." Needless to say, I wonder if this cult would accept Joe Rogan into it. I know we've talked about Joe Rogan a lot, but here's Joe Rogan entering this cult for the first time. "Welcome, brother. We have awaited you."
Jamie, pull up that video of that bear smoking DMT. Also, pull up a Trust Me Bro video, please.
And that's totally real and definitely happened. Another weird thing about the temple's website is that they just take passages from the Bible and then just kind of add stuff to it. For example, their website features, quote, 1 St. John's 2:26. But I don't really know what saint is supposed to mean in this instance. Also, what their website says is notably different from the original scripture, with the original scripture saying, "I am writing these things to you about those who are trying to lead you astray." And this website's version of the scripture is, quote, "Salvation does not come from the darkness. Alcohol, cocaine, morphine, dishonesty, violence. Our Eucharist is DPT, a very powerful angel of a host, closely related to psilocybin." In my opinion, the biggest problem with this cult's claims is that DPT doesn't even occur in nature, and it also fails to be molecularly similar to psilocybin like they claimed in that verse. Alright, enough about the cult, which to me is one of the most insane parts about this drug, but what is the drug itself actually like? Well, the general consensus on the internet is that this drug is just, for lack of better words, eerie. And it's also one of the first drugs I've ever found that even experienced psychedelic users have been wary of. So, in other words, using this drug would feel exactly like how you would expect using a cult drug to feel like, with many users reporting dark spiritual experiences being associated with this chemical. For example, one Reddit post I found on the substance goes into detail about why it was the worst trip they ever had. This Redditor started by saying, quote, "So the other day I broke out some DPT and took around 50 milligrams. I have plenty of psychedelic experience consisting of high doses of the following: DMT, LSD, mushrooms, MDA, DMX, 4-HOMET, and some other things I'm sure I've forgotten. But even my worst trips don't even touch DPT. Nothing gets close to what I just experienced, and it was possibly the worst psychedelic experience I've ever had." He then goes on to say, quote, "This is the weirdest, eeriest, and strangest, most intense chemical I have ever ingested. At first, it felt pretty good, and the visuals were quite enjoyable. But about 15 minutes after dosing, something became very off. It felt as if something had entered my body and I was no longer in control whatsoever, but in a different way than DMT. I didn't even feel that intoxicated, which was the weird and scary part. I just felt a complete loss of control. Then comes the craziest part, in my opinion. They go on to say, quote, I had an extreme eerie feeling along with extreme disassociation and possibly even slight psychosis-like symptoms. This feels like a direct pathway to communications with evil spirits. Many people who follow the philosophy of naturalism believe that designer drugs are a connection to evil spirits because they aren't naturally occurring, and thus weren't meant for human consumption. I know this is a bit off topic, but I thought it was an interesting concept to keep in mind for this specifically. The Redditor goes on to say, quote, the next night I also had extremely vivid, terrifying nightmares and sleep paralysis. During sleep paralysis, a tall, black entity had quite literally tormented me until I fell back into my dream, then continued to do so in my nightmare. I usually do not have experiences like this, and I also never have had sleep paralysis. And if you found that story creepy, the comments aren't any more comforting, with one user commenting, quote, some people are sensitive to spiritual attacks. In this materialistic, spiritually closed-minded civilization we live in, everything is just reduced to chemicals, states of mind, or psychologicalized, or written off in another way. The spiritual world is just non-existent under that frame. And finally, one last claim I found about DPT was the following. Quote, I've been taking DPT and it makes me feel possessed in a way. Almost like I'm the creepy dude in Hereditary. That sort of thing, I suppose. Just like I'm channeling something very intense that transcends humanity. All of the drugs on this list are insane, and I don't think any more detail is required on why. And for all of the people who commented on the first video that they wanted to try them, don't. And if you want to try anything, remember to try today's sponsor, link in the description. Those gummies are legal and actually pleasant. Thank you guys so much for watching this video, and if you did enjoy this video and want me to continue the craziest drug series, please leave a like and comment below. And who knows, maybe part 3 isn't so far away. And just in case you haven't watched part 1 yet, or simply want to watch it again, part 1 is available right here on screen. Thank you guys so much for watching, and as always, trust me, bro. Forbidden places you will never visit. Just imagine you're on a fishing boat in the Bay of Bengal. You've had a successful day and it's time to get back to shore, when all of a sudden a typhoon forms right in front of your face over the water. And before you know it, your boat has been flipped and you are essentially lost at sea. Your entire crew is gone and you're holding onto a floating board for dear life. Your energy is low from kicking and screaming, and you pass out, clinging to this board. You wake up later, looking at a clear sky, and you notice you're not in the water anymore. You're on the beach, but you don't know what beach you're at because you weren't near land. You cough up some water and start to sit up when you realize a small bunch of blobs in the distance. You see them approach and you realize that it's people, but not people you've seen before. The closer you get, the more you realize that these people are barely clothed and wielding sticks and bows. Did you time travel? Unfortunately not. You have just washed up on North Sentinel Island. North Sentinel Island is the first location on this list, and it is likely one of the most well-known forbidden places in the entire world. Oh, and as far as the fisherman who washed up on the beach, yeah, his skull is now a pendant for one of the Sentinelese people. North Sentinel Island is one of the Andaman Islands in the Indian archipelago in the Bay of Bengal, which also includes some other smaller islands as well. What makes North Sentinel Island so unique is the fact that it's solely occupied by a voluntarily isolated indigenous tribe, who are believed to have been there for over 60,000 years. These people are known as the Sentinelese, and they have made their wishes known by force, specifically by killing anybody who tries to contact them or even come close. They have made their message so clear that the Indian Navy patrols the area around the North Sentinel Island to protect it from people trying to enter it. And the Indian government does not prosecute any Sentinelese people for killing people that try to step ashore. That's insane that this uncontacted tribe is essentially immune to the law. The Sentinelese have not only attacked people that have stepped on shore, but have also repeatedly attacked approaching vessels, whether those be fishing boats or simply any sort of low-flying helicopter or plane in the range of their bows and arrows. The story I told at the beginning of this segment is actually inspired by real events that took place in 2006. During this time, Sentinelese islanders killed 2 fishermen whose boat drifted ashore. And like the intro story, this approach wasn't even intentional. Although, speaking of intentionally visiting the Sentinelese, in 2018, a 26-year-old man named John Chu, who was an American Christian missionary, tried on 3 separate attempts to visit the North Sentinelese people, likely to convert them to Christianity, but unfortunately on his 3rd trip, which he was successfully able to approach these people, he was unsurprisingly murdered, which is obviously unfortunate. But this young man was warned by the Indian government and other authorities. In 1956, there was an Islands Protection of Aboriginal Tribes regulation that was put in place that restricted any approach closer than 5 nautical miles, which is essentially anywhere within a 10-kilometer radius of the island. The biggest reason why this regulation was put in place is to protect the Sentinelese people from mainland diseases. Due to the severity of the isolation of North Sentinel Island, they have almost no immunity to any modern-day disease or germ that may be on you or I right now. So if you were to visit North Sentinel Island, there's a very likely chance that even spending time around them, breathing near them, shaking one of their hands, could lead to the death of the entire population of the Sentinelese people simply by spreading germs. North Sentinel Island is a forbidden location that I personally don't intend on breaking any rules to visit. But what if fishing wasn't your speed? Perhaps you are more interested in agriculture, specifically Chinese agriculture. The year is 1974, and you are simply on your farm. And what's a good farm without a well? So, you start digging a well. However, this day was different. As you start digging, you notice something. Something that is about to uncover one of the largest excavation projects of all time. And then you go deeper and you notice hardened fragments of terracotta. And then you notice bronze arrowheads. And then terracotta bricks. Well, in that case, you just discovered the tomb of Qin Shi Huang, the first Qin emperor of China. These artifacts were submitted to the government, and shortly after, archaeologists arrived. And although they were curious and interested about the artifacts that may have laid underground, they were not at all prepared for what they were about to find. What they found was a massive necropolis, the size of a small city, with a plethora of artifacts, weapons, vehicles, and most famously, terracotta soldiers. There is estimated to be over 8,000 terracotta soldiers in total, but that actual figure is unknown because this mausoleum is still not fully excavated and may never be. Keep in mind, this excavation has been going on since 1974 and still continues to this day. This mausoleum was built from 246 to 208 BC. The mausoleum mirrored the city of Jianyang with an inner and outer city structure. And although this outer and inner city structure where the terracotta soldiers have been found has began to be excavated, one place that has never been touched was the tomb itself. This tomb is at the very center of the complex, and it is very large. In case the thousands of terracotta soldiers were not enough of a sign, the late Qin Shi Huang did not want people entering his tomb. At least, not without a fight, I guess. So I suppose that begs the question, why did the government keep excavating? Well, the 3 reasons they listed publicly were the following. One was the fact that this area was a seismic zone, and they needed to remove these historic artifacts to protect them. The next reason was for tourism, to potentially make it something that people could visit and appreciate. And the third reason was to prevent grave robbing, essentially theorizing that if they didn't take it, somebody else would. In case the 8,000 terracotta soldiers didn't make this obvious, this mausoleum is massive. The replica inner city is over 2.5 kilometers in circumference, and the outer city is over 6.3 kilometers in circumference, which is insane for a mausoleum. Even the tomb itself is massive. It's believed to be 80 meters east to west and 50 meters north to south, and 15 meters tall on the inside. However, the interior height is debated. It is a very real possibility that we will never be able to know what's inside the tomb, simply because of limitations in archaeological abilities, specifically the risk of destroying so many other artifacts just to get inside the tomb. But we do have historical accounts of what is said to be inside the tomb, which is the following. The emperor's tomb is surrounded by rivers of liquid mercury, which was the emperor's immortality elixir of choice. Which, just quick side note, yeah, this emperor was literally drinking mercury to try to extend his life, which ironically ended up causing him to go crazy and die. But okay, back to the historical account. There is a domed ceiling representing celestial bodies made from pearls and precious gems. The floor has a design of the entire map of his empire. And besides all of his precious belongings and stunning architecture, there was of course claims of booby traps, specifically crossbow traps that would be activated if anybody tried to enter the tomb, which would result in them, of course, being shot and killed. Here's where things get interesting. These accounts were of course questionable, and archaeologists were suspicious. But after probing the soil near the tomb, it was confirmed that the mercury levels in the soil were 100 times over the normal level, giving some credibility to these historic claims. Which also gives credibility to the fact that there may be booby traps, which has essentially spooked archaeologists, as they believe these traps would be fully functioning, which I personally find hard to believe, but I also wouldn't risk it either. This tomb is listed as a World Heritage Site and is therefore protected by legal entities. But that's not the only reason why you're not able to go here. Unlike North Sentinel Island, which is relatively easy to visit if you have a boat or know somebody with a boat, the tomb of Qin Shi Huan is simply unable to be reached, at least to any regular person with reasonable means. What I mean is, of course, if you hypothetically had a bunch of dynamite, you could blow it up, but obviously that's not realistic. Or is it? No. Unless... Just kidding. Therefore, you're not only not allowed to visit it, you're also not able, making it a perfect entry for this list. Let's hope that you got your sea legs back, because we're hitting the water again. This time, we're going to a remote island intentionally, although it's not off the coast of India. This island is actually in the Arctic Circle. This island is known as Spitsbergen, and it's tucked away in the Arctic Svalbard archipelago. And if you're wondering why we're going here, it's primarily because of your passion for agriculture. Spitsbergen is the home of the Svalbard Global Seed Vault, and this seed vault is one of the most interesting places in the entire world, and is kind of an interesting take on the Doomsday Vault. In short, it's an ultra-secure facility with the sole purpose of being a safeguard for global crop diversity by storing duplicates of every known seed. This place is really just a sperm bank for plants, or other stuff like that. The Seed Vault is actually a partnership between the Norwegian government and Crop Trust, which is a genetic resource center, which sounds evil, but probably isn't. But it might be. This facility is epic, and if you like brutalist architecture, you are going to love this building. It's essentially a concrete slab sticking out the side of a mountain in the middle of an uninhabited Arctic wasteland. To me, it seems like a pretty cool place to store some stuff. The entire facility goes almost 400 feet into the side of a mountain, and a majority of this facility is kept at negative 18 degrees Celsius, as that is the recommended temperature to store seeds. I guess, I don't know, I'm not a seed expert. One unique failsafe about this facility that I think is pretty cool is the fact that even if all the refrigeration units failed today, the seed vault would still be completely protected because it is stored within permafrost, meaning that it's very well insulated and very cold. Now, if only the people that designed this designed the Death Star too. As of 2022, there is over 1.2 million unique types of seed in this facility. And interestingly, and potentially somewhat obviously, this facility is not manned. It is autonomous, and I suppose that's a good thing considering the fact that it's literally in the middle of nowhere, always kept at deadly temperatures with basically nothing around you. This seed bank is a really unique modern invention that I think serves a genuine purpose that hopefully we will never need, but could very well serve a massive role in the development of humanity if it ever came to it. I think it goes without saying that this seed vault is completely off limits. Not only is it in an extremely remote location in a part of the world that's already hard to navigate and travel to, but the facility itself is extremely secure. So unfortunately, you won't be able to check out the cool seed collection, but that's okay. And you're a person of culture. Modern archives and architecture is cool, but you want history. You want to see some cool stuff and some old stuff. And for that exact reason, we're going to France. The date is September 12th, 1940, and you and your trusty dog are on a walk like any other day. Your dog notices a hole left by an uprooted tree, and you notice something rather interesting, but you don't bother at the moment. You go home and ponder on what you may have saw and decide that you have some unfinished business, and you return to that uprooted tree with 3 of your best friends. You begin digging, a common theme in this video I suppose, and notice that this uprooted tree has a lot below it. Specifically, a 15-meter deep cave shaft. You and your friends are brave, and you enter the cave and start exploring. And not only do you see some cool stalactites and stalagmites and light brights, but you also see interesting designs on the walls. Those designs were ancient cave paintings depicting animals. This cave is known as Lascaux Cave, and it is a network of caves in southwestern France with over 600 cave paintings found on the interior walls of its caves. It is suggested that these paintings were not made all at once and that they were the combined effort of many generations. And although they haven't been able to quite pinpoint a date for each and every one of these paintings, the general consensus is that these paintings are anywhere from 17 to 22,000 years old, which is so cool. There was an amount of time where this cave was actually open to the public for tours, but over time, due to carbon dioxide, heat, humidity, and other contaminants produced by the 1,200 visitors that visited these caves a day, the paintings were essentially disintegrating and were being visibly damaged. Therefore, the cave was closed to the public in 1963. Since then, the paintings have been restored to their original state and a monitoring system has been put in place. It's actually just a baguette holding a door closed. I don't know, I'm sure they've got something amazing. So yeah, unless you're able to travel at least 70 years into the past, you're not going to be seeing these original 22,000-year-old paintings. However, this story does have a bit of a happy ending, because obviously there was demand for these cave tours, and that wasn't going anywhere anytime soon. So what the authorities actually did was create exact replicas of this cave system for people to explore and visit without any risk of the originals being damaged, which is honestly pretty cool. But what isn't cool is snakes. And since 2 out of the 4 entries on this list so far have been on islands, let's add another one to the list and combine the two. Snakes in an island. You know what that gets you? You're right. Snake Island. No, not the island boy's haircut. Snake Island is an island, I know. And it is also off the coast of Brazil. The island is famous for, of course, its large population of venomous snakes, specifically the golden lancehead pit viper. And what's interesting is that this island is the only known natural home for this breed of snakes. But there is a bit of mystery surrounding this island. How exactly did these snakes get here, and why is there so many of them? It's not called Snake Island because there's a few. It's called Snake Island because it's only inhabited by snakes, and a lot of them at that. The island is roughly 106 acres in area, and is believed to be the home of around 400,000 snakes, although that number more recently has been debated. But if you ask me, I don't think we're getting an accurate head count anytime soon. Point being, there is a lot of snakes on this island. But the question remains, how did these snakes get here? And I hope you brought your tissues, because it's kind of a sad story. Basically, when the Portuguese colonized Brazil, the Portuguese made all of the native Brazilians disown their pet snakes. Obviously outraged, the native Brazilians didn't give up their snakes without a fight, and they banded up all of their snakes and sent them off to sea on a raft, hoping that they would find a better life. After a few days, this raft of about 500,000 snakes washed up ashore on this uninhabited island, and the rest is history. I totally just made all of that up. The real reason why there is so many snakes on this island is much more simple. During the last ice age, this island, which is now 33 kilometers off the coast of Brazil, was actually connected to the mainland. But near the end of the ice age, as water levels started to rise, the snakes essentially became trapped on this island. Their population grew due to a lack of natural predators. Fortunately, these snakes weren't the only animals on the island. There was actually a plethora of ladders, but unfortunately, after a few dangerous games of snakes and ladders, only the snakes remained. I don't know why I'm lying so much in this video, but hopefully you can tell fact from fiction. Sure, there's a lot of snakes on an island, but there's a lot of snakes on a plane too, and people are still on the plane. Why is there not people on this island? Well, similar to North Sentinel Island, Snake Island is off limits to any civilians. The Brazilian Navy claims that this is for the protection of both the snakes and the people that may potentially try to access the island. The only people that are advised to go on the island have to be vetted by the Institute for Biodiversity Conservation, which I'm assuming is no easy task. And if you try to go the other way, well, you'll have to deal with the Brazilian Navy. And similar to North Sentinel Island, if the snakes kill you, the Brazilian Navy is not going to put them in jail. That's crazy that now twice on this list, there is groups of people that are immune to the law simply because they got an island. I wonder if there's any more recent examples of people with islands breaking the law. That's an interesting phenomenon, but let's keep moving. Wait, okay, last thing I'm gonna say about Snake Island. Making fake maps claiming that there is buried treasure on this remote island, when in reality, it's actually just Snake Island, would be a hilarious prank. Not in the modern day, but definitely pirate times, dude. This was a pirate time banger of a prank, guaranteed. You know what? We're on the topic of islands. Last island, one last island for the list. Palette cleanse, we'll go through it quick. Morgan Island. No story, no nothing. Just straight up facts. Morgan Island is also known as Monkey Island, and if you can't guess why it's called that, you may live on Monkey Island. Monkey Island is famous for, of course, its population of free-ranged monkeys. It is completely uninhabited by people, and this island is protected by the Department of Natural Resources and the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, which use it for public health research, which unfortunately is basically just animal testing. Boo. Monkey Island, unlike Snake Island, is not naturally occurring, and actually has a very odd origin story. To put it bluntly, there was a lot of monkeys in Puerto Rico that were carrying hepatitis B, and it was becoming so much much of a problem that there was frequent outbreaks. So what is the most logical and reasonable next step? Well, according to some people in 1979, the best idea was to capture 1,400 monkeys and relocate them to a remote island in South Carolina. And ladies and gentlemen, Morgan Island, aka Monkey Island. So in case you ever wanted to be surrounded by over 1,000 monkeys with hepatitis, Morgan Island definitely needs to be on your travel wish list. But you don't just want to go to remote islands full of uncontacted tribes or a plethora of dangerous animals. And you don't want to go to rural China. And you don't like the cold, so Norway's out too. Well, if that's the case, then I have one last location for you. And if you're a Reddit meme lord, then you're going to be right at home. This last forbidden location takes us to a salt flat in the middle of Nevada. The salt flat is known as Groom Lake. And what makes this salt flat relevant to this video is what's built on the salt flat. That being a Nevada test and training range. But there's military bases everywhere, so what makes this one so special? This test and training range is home to one of the most popular and highly classified United States Air Force bases, most commonly known as Area 51. Interestingly, Area 51 was never considered a secret base. However, it is the home for some of the most secret and sensitive documents that pertain to military intel in the United States. The origin of the name Area 51 is actually unknown. However, according to the CIA, the proper names for the facility are Homey Airport and Groom Lake. The primary initial purpose of Area 51 was a testing ground for Project Aquatone, the development of the Lockheed U-2, which was one of the most iconic spy planes of all time, and still has a lot of mystery surrounding it, almost 70 years later. Since then, this area has gained a lot more popularity, and due to the secrecy surrounding it, there has been no shortage of questions, mysteries, and conspiracy theories surrounding the happenings of this military base. Obviously, with the most famous examples being its affiliation with aliens. I honestly wish I had more to talk about, but facts about this location are kind of hard to come by, and I don't think I need to explain why a military base with sensitive information is off limits. But I do find it kind of interesting that, although this is a perfect entry for this video, it's a bit of a catch-22. Because for any random civilian, Area 51 is a place you will never even get close to. At least, not alive. But for hundreds of people, this is a place they come every single day. It's their job. But that's a different story. In 2019, there was actually a large movement for people with way too much free time to storm Area 51 to get answers and see an alien for themselves. This movement was heavily meme-based, but was still very real. On the night of the actual event, over 1,500 people showed up at the border of Area 51, primarily partying and enjoying the scenery, although some took it more serious than others. At the end of the event, nobody got in, surprisingly nobody died, and 7 people were arrested. It was a mostly peaceful meme, but I'm sure when all of this was gaining traction and popularity online, some government employees were definitely starting to sweat a bit. But speaking of sweat, I do have a confession. I may or may not have gotten really sweaty researching for this video, and I found way more entries than I could ever put in just one video. But luckily for you, I have the ability to make more videos. So if you guys really enjoyed this video and want to see more forbidden locations, then I would be more than happy to make a part 2 and share with you some likely even more interesting, strange, and some downright scary locations that you or anybody else will likely never visit. So if that's something you want, let me know in the comments or leave this video a like, and I'll be sure to get on that. But with that being said, thank you guys so much for watching this video. I learned a lot researching these places, and I hope you guys learned something too. If you're looking for another excuse to keep procrastinating, I recommend checking out this video on screen. It's about what it was like to get rich in every time period, specifically how people would accumulate wealth. It's pretty interesting. I appreciate you guys checking out my silly little video. And as always, trust me, bro. Historical misconceptions you probably still believe. In this video, I'm going to be exposing the truth about history and opening your mind to a new reality. Once you know the truth, you will be able to impress your friends and family with your new knowledge. So let's get started. Oh, keep out your pen and paper, because this is going to be rapid fire knowledge. Basically the whole video. So when referring to the timeline of human existence, we know that BC means before Christ, right? And AD means after death, right? Well, actually no. That's only 50% true. Many people mistakenly believe that AD stands for after death, but it actually stands for Anno Domini, which is Latin for in the year of the Lord. I probably butchered that Latin, and I'm sure you guys will comment about it. But yeah, BC does in fact stand for before Christ, but AD doesn't stand for after death. Next up, you might have heard that Singapore can put you in jail for chewing gum. Once again, that's not necessarily fully true. Since 1992, Singapore has enforced strict regulations on chewing gum, specifically making it illegal to import and sell. However, despite rumors suggesting otherwise, chewing gum does not lead to any sort of jail time. However, carrying large quantities and disposing of it improperly can result in a hefty fine. And by hefty, I mean $1,000. The reason why this ban was even put in place is kind of interesting, and it basically just stems from the government being so fed up with people putting gum in really weird places, specifically vandals shoving it into key locks, mailboxes, elevator buttons, and other strange places that would cause issues. There is also more normal places like bus seats and under tables and other normal places you would find gum, unfortunately. So yeah, Singapore, don't chew your gum there. And if you do, keep $1,000 in your pocket. You might need it. But it's better than jail. Trust me, bro. Next up, we all know that Walt Disney was cryogenically frozen, right? Well, despite rumors, he wasn't at all. He was actually cremated, and his ashes were spread across the Forest Lawn Memorial Park in Glendale, California. I honestly have no idea where this came from, and I definitely remember hearing this growing up, but it's interesting to know that it's not true at all, and actually the opposite is true. So yeah, if you are for some reason excited to see a thawed out Walt Disney, don't get your hopes up. Okay, so I'm gonna ask you a very simple question. How long was the 100-Year War? Was it A, 10 years, B, 100 years, C, 200 years, or D, 116 years? The answer may shock you. It is 116 years. That is right. The 100-Year War was actually more than 100 years, which I guess kind of makes sense, but why this is a misconception is because a lot of people automatically believe that the 100-Year War was exactly 100 years, which it wasn't. By a lot of people, I mean me, and I'm hoping that I'm not the only one. Now, talking about something extremely fun, the Black Plague. What little creature was the most significant method of transmission for this awful disease? Well, rats, right? Not exactly. We all know during the time of the Black Plague, rats played a significant role, and that is true, but they were not the most significant vector of transmission. No. Also, for context, why the rats were so dangerous is because they were carrying fleas which were carrying the bubonic plague. So if these flea-carrying rats weren't the most significant way that people got sick, what was? Well, it was still fleas, but it wasn't rat fleas. It was human fleas. Lice and human fleas were way more significant in getting people sick, and I guess that makes sense because consider how many rats you meet on a daily basis versus how many people you meet. Big difference, especially when you're in an extremely crowded city setting. So I think we all owe rats a big apology for blaming them for the bubonic plague, but not too much of an apology because they still killed a lot of people via flea transmission. Let's talk about politics again. The fall of the Berlin Wall ended division in Germany, right? Like, as soon as the wall came down, everything was better, right? No. While the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989 was a symbolic moment marking the ending the Cold War division of Germany, the process of reunification was complex and took several years to complete. Social, economic, and political challenges persisted long after the wall came down. The way I look at it was that the fall of the wall was the beginning of change, not the end of it. It was definitely a catalyst and a step in the right direction, but it wasn't a magical solution that saved everything, at least not initially. We all know how things ended up playing out. I feel like this one is more or less self-explanatory and pretty obvious if you think critically about the situation, but I think for the most part, a lot of people just assume that, oh, as soon as the wall came down, that's when everything got better, it was instantly great, but if you look at it, like, no, if you're unifying two opposite and separate parties, it's gonna take some time for them to acclimate to each other. But eventually, we took the west side and the east side, and we brought them together, and they kissed, and they lived happily ever after. Okay, so I'm assuming most of you remember 2012, specifically the fact that it was supposed to be the end of the world according to the Mayan calendar. And we all know that the Mayan calendar specifically stated that in 2012, the world will end, right? If you've been following along, anytime I ask you a leading question, it's wrong, and this is no exception. That is absolutely not the case. This entire situation is more or less based off of misinterpretations, and obviously we have no first-hand accounts to get the true scoop on what this really meant. So this is what we have. While some interpretations of the Mayan calendar suggested that a significant cycle would end in 2012, there's no actual evidence to support the idea that the Mayans predicted the end of the world on this date. The 2012 phenomenon was largely modern interpretations that were based on no historical beliefs. And it could even just be as simple as the fact that the Mayans didn't make the calendar go beyond 2012 for whatever reason. That part is unknown, but what is known is that they were never specifically saying 2012 the world will end. That's simply a misconception. a historical misconception. Speaking of which, we all know that Cleopatra and Julius Caesar banged. We talked about it in my last video. If you haven't seen it, watch it after this one. But what I didn't mention in that video, which I didn't even know at the time, which is kind of embarrassing to admit, is that Cleopatra is not of Egyptian descent. She's actually of Greek descent. I feel like this is more or less commonly known, but I wanted to add it because I didn't know it, so I wanted to save somebody else from being embarrassed as well. Oh, and Cleopatra ruled Egypt, but not ancient Egypt. This is another thing that I'm sure a lot of people know, but I feel like it's worth saying. Cleopatra actually lived closer to the iPhone than she did to the construction of the pyramids, so let that sink in. No, like I seriously mean it. Like if you could get the door, that'd be great. This guy's been standing there for like 5 minutes. Anyways, we all know that George Washington had wooden teeth, right? Of course not. Don't get me wrong. He had some messed up chompers and they were made out of some weird stuff, but they were not just wood. I'm pretty sure like one of his initial pairs of dentures had wood in them, but the later versions were nothing of the sort. George Washington notoriously had dental issues from his early 20s, and it's believed that his speeches were notoriously short because of his dental issues, and his teeth also affected the shape of his face over his life. His dentures are on display to this day and consist of a menagerie of gold, lead, human teeth, and even ivory. This guy had the most insane set of grills like 300 years before it was even cool. But yeah, they weren't just wood. I'm gonna tell a personal story. My dad has like bad teeth, like fake teeth. He has a lot of fake teeth, like dentures. And one time they broke. I think he sat on them or something. He asked me to go get glue to fix them. I was a kid. I didn't know what I was doing. So I went and I got wood glue. And he was mad that I got wood glue, but he still used it. And he fixed his teeth. And I think to this day, he still uses dentures that are held together with wood glue. So yeah, I don't know. I wanted to share a personal story. Okay, back to the video. Staying on the topic of the olden days, most men wore wigs in the colonial era, right? Like you see in all the paintings, like everyone was doing it, right? No. In colonial times, wearing wigs was a status symbol, signifying wealth and prestige. Only about 5% of the population could even afford them, mainly lawyers, statesmen, and affluent women. Wigs were costly and inaccessible to the average person, akin to luxury items like a Rolex watch or a Versace handbag. Nowadays, wigs are readily available, anyone can get one, but in the 1700s, somebody with a wig, they were ballin'. Like Mr. Ballin level ballin'. Like if Mr. Ballin and Alec Baldwin were playing basketball and they were balling and they were going band for band and they were showing how much they were ballin'. So was everybody just rocking wigs in the colonial time? No. Was all the rich people in colonial times rocking wigs? Yes. Is this a misconception? I'll let you decide. And with that, I want to say a brief thank you. If you're watching this video shortly after upload, we are either extremely close or we have just hit 100,000 subscribers. And if you're watching this in the future, maybe we have 1 million. Who knows? Regardless, I just wanted to say thank you so much for your guys' continued support. It means so much. I honestly had no intentions of starting a YouTube channel when I got the idea for this channel, but I thought, hey, why not? Let's give it a try. And the last 5 months have been honestly amazing. I've wanted to be a YouTuber since a kid and I've had multiple failed channels. So to have something that actually has taken off and performed well is amazing. Like I said, we've only been around for just over 5 months and I'm so excited to see what the next 5 years looks like for the channel. Thank you guys so much for subscribing and just being all around awesome and being a part of the bro community, I guess. I know this video is a bit shorter than usual, but hopefully you guys enjoyed it and found it fun. The next video we're cooking up is going to be really interesting, so stick around for that. Like always, trust me, bro.